Beneath layers of ancient stone and forgotten earth lie the remains of creatures so strange they defy everything we thought we knew about life on this planet. Some had twisted horns, others wore armor like living tanks. There were birds taller than humans, apes that rivaled monsters, reptiles that looked like myths brought to life. They're gone now, extinct, but not forgotten. Because their bones whisper stories, stories of ecosystems that shouldn't have existed, of predators with no known prey, of creatures that vanished without warning, leaving behind questions science still can't answer. Why did some disappear in the blink of an evolutionary eye, while others seemed too advanced for their time? Are we uncovering fossils, or fragments of something far stranger? And then there are the myths, the beasts etched into ancient temples and tribal memories. Serpent lions, thunderbirds, unicorns. Were they symbolic? Or did our ancestors see something we've long since buried? These are not the stories of fairy tales. These are real remains, real records, and real mysteries. So sit back, relax, and let's dive deep into the lost world of bizarre extinct animals, where science meets myth, and the past is anything but dead. In the remote hills of Henan province, dust clings to the air like a memory that refuses to fade. The landscape is a quiet expanse of low, weathered cliffs and sun-scorched earth, unchanged for centuries. Farmers still work the soil here, as they have for generations, turning up stone and bone with every season. But in this land, not all bones belong to men or livestock. Some are impossibly large, curved, ribbed. A single fragment might weigh more than a sack of grain. To the villagers, they are known simply as long gu, dragon bones. These relics have been unearthed for thousands of years, often crushed into powder, mixed with herbs, and sold in traditional Chinese medicine shops. Said to treat fevers, ease anxiety, and ward off evil spirits, dragon bones were believed to contain the energy of the creature they once came from, Long, the mythical Chinese dragon. A being of power and wisdom, not evil, but elemental, a guardian of rivers and skies. But what were these dragon bones, really? It wasn't until the early 20th century that a new layer of the mystery began to unfold. In 1923, a Chinese pharmacist named Yang Zhongjian, who would later become the father of Chinese paleontology, visited one such medicine shop in Beijing. There, among jars of powdered roots and dried scorpions, he noticed an unusual fragment for sale. It wasn't from a deer or an ox or any modern animal. It had the unmistakable structure of a fossil. He traced the bone back to the excavation site in Henan. What followed was a revelation. The so-called dragon bones were fossilized remains of ancient creatures, many of them from the late Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. Dinosaurs, some never before seen by science, had been sleeping beneath Chinese soil for millions of years, mistaken for dragons and ground into medicine. Yet here's where the story becomes more than just a tale of science correcting folklore. Because for centuries before paleontology had a name, Chinese herbalists, shamans, and village elders were identifying, collecting, and classifying fossils. Not with microscopes, but with myth. In a curious way, they weren't entirely wrong. The traditional Chinese dragon doesn't resemble the fire-breathing monsters of the West. It slithers like a snake, soars without wings, has the antlers of a stag, the claws of a hawk, the whiskers of a catfish, and the body of something prehistoric. In fact, many ancient Chinese depictions of dragons bear a striking resemblance to sauropods and theropods, long-necked, long-tailed dinosaurs that once walked this very land. Could early peoples, lacking a scientific framework, have based their mythology on actual fossil finds? It's a tantalizing idea, and not exclusive to China. In ancient Greece, Similar misinterpretations may have inspired legends of the Cyclops, born from mastodon skulls. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, winged beasts and chimeras could have originated from fossilized fragments, recombined through imagination. But in China, something unique happened. Rather than being feared, these beasts were revered. Fossils became part of medicine, philosophy, and national identity, embedded in the culture rather than feared as monstrous anomalies. Still, some elements remain unresolved. Not all of the bones unearthed in dragon bone fields fit known species. Some are oversized, misshapen, or arranged in ways that puzzle modern paleontologists. Could there be unknown dinosaur species still lying beneath Henan's hills? Or even now, being sold unknowingly in back alley medicine shops? And then there are the carvings. In ancient oracle bones, usually ox scapulae or turtle shells used in Shang dynasty divination, there are depictions of dragon-like beasts with unusual anatomical precision. Split tails, ridged backs, clawed feet. Are these images symbolic or observational? Some fringe theorists suggest that certain dynastic records describe events, earthquakes, celestial omens, floods, coinciding with dragon appearances. What if some of these weren't entirely mythical? Could rare fossil exposures following landslides or tremors have given rise to these sightings? Or are we glimpsing something far older than human memory? Echoes of creatures witnessed by early Homo sapiens, passed down and transfigured into myth. Mainstream science stops short of such speculations, but the mystery remains. In China today, the term dragon bone still lingers in language and lore. Paleontological expeditions now treat Henan as one of the most fossil-rich regions in the world. Entire skeletons have been recovered, some dating back over 150 million years, while others remain buried beneath fields and foundations, waiting to be uncovered by accident, curiosity, or fate. And so we're left with a haunting possibility that mythology and science, once thought to stand in opposition, may have always been telling the same story, just in different tongues. Were dragons ever real? Or is the truth more complicated, more human? Perhaps the bones know, but for now they stay silent in the soil. The desert winds move gently across the ruins of ancient Sumer, brushing against broken stone and half-buried relics as if trying to uncover the secrets they still hold. In what was once the fertile cradle of civilization, the city-states of Mesopotamia rose along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates. Today, little remains but fragments, cuneiform tablets, ceremonial objects, and crumbling bas-reliefs worn by time. But among these remnants is an image that continues to puzzle archaeologists and mythologists alike. Etched into ceremonial palettes, carved on seal impressions, and painted onto the walls of temples in both Mesopotamia and pre-dynastic Egypt, this figure recurs with an unsettling elegance. Two long-necked creatures, bodies coiled like leopards, necks like serpents, faces vaguely feline, but stretched and surreal. They're shown intertwining, sometimes flanking a central figure, other times facing one another with mouths open as if in silent conversation. They are not lions, they are not snakes, they are serpopards, a name given by modern scholars blending serpent and leopard to describe something for which no real-world equivalent exists. Where did this creature come from? And more intriguingly, why did two ancient cultures, separated by thousands of miles, depict the same fantastical beast? In Mesopotamia, the serpopard appears as early as the Uruk period, around 3300 BC. Often carved into cylinder seals, the creatures flank divine or kingly figures. The precision of their depiction is striking. These weren't chaotic scribbles of mythical beasts. Their posture, musculature, even the tension in their coiled tails suggest a creature observed or imagined with intention. Yet, no known animal matches the form. Could it be symbolic? Most scholars suggest yes. In this interpretation, the serpopard embodies duality, a clash of predator and serpent, control and chaos, the desert and the river. The Mesopotamians, like the Egyptians, viewed the world through a lens of oppositional balance. The serpent was not simply evil, it was primordial. The leopard, not just a hunter, but a symbol of divine authority. When merged, the creature might represent the taming of nature, the reach of kingship over the wilderness, or something even more cosmological, forces beyond comprehension. Yet, there are details that complicate the symbolic reading. In some depictions, the Serpopards are shown being led on leashes, tamed, controlled. But how does one leash a myth? Could these be artistic exaggerations of now extinct animals? Large carnivores once roamed the ancient Near East: lions, leopards, massive snakes. Could early sightings of rare or now vanished hybrids, perhaps feline predators with elongated necks due to genetic mutation, have birthed the image? Others have pointed to the giraffe, a creature known to ancient Egyptians and later to Persians and Greeks, but rarely to Mesopotamians. Could merchants traveling through Africa have spoken of creatures with towering necks and spotted hides? Could such tales, distorted by distance and time, have reached Sumerian ears and been reimagined into a composite form? It's plausible, but the giraffe's peaceful demeanor and herbivorous nature don't quite match the fierce, dynamic presence of the Serpopard. Then there's the deeper mystery: the double appearance. Not only does the Serpopard emerge in Mesopotamia, but also in pre-dynastic Egyptian art, such as the famed Narmer palette, dated to around 3100 BC. There, two Serpopards mirror each other, necks intertwined in a perfect symmetrical spiral. These cultures had contact, yes, trade across the Red Sea and through overland routes is well established. But why this creature? And why does it vanish from both artistic traditions shortly after the early dynastic periods? Was it based on a real animal now lost to time? Some scholars have pointed out the possibility of a now extinct feline or mammalian predator with strange proportions, an animal that may have briefly coexisted with early human civilizations and left just enough of an impression to be immortalized. Fossil records in the region are far from complete, and many prehistoric species remain unclassified. Could the Serpopard be the lingering cultural memory of such a beast? There are even more speculative theories. Some point to the Serpopard as part of a shared archetypal memory, a concept found in Jungian psychology where humanity collectively recalls forms, symbols, and fears passed down through generations. The long-necked beast with piercing eyes and an unnatural form may represent something deeper than nature, a psychological shadow, a cosmic fear. Others look to the stars. Certain fringe theorists have argued that the twin Serpopards represent celestial alignments, perhaps binary stars or twin deities lost to time. Some go further still, suggesting that the creatures were not mythological at all, but depictions of beings from beyond, interpreted through the limited lens of ancient minds. Mainstream archaeology avoids such conclusions, and rightly so. But even the most conservative voices admit there is something uncanny about the consistency, precision, and symbolic weight of the Serpopard. Why invent a creature so elaborate, depicted across distant regions, and then abandon it almost entirely? Why create a myth without a mythos? Today, the image of the Serpopard survives mostly in museums and scholarly journals, its meaning debated, its origin obscured. The seals lie in glass cases, silent and still, their ancient impressions pressed into clay long before the invention of paper or ink. But they speak in their own way. They speak of a time when humans stood at the edge of known life, staring into the wilderness, and imagined creatures that blended the real and the unreal, the natural and the impossible. Was the Serpopard a myth, a message, or a memory? Perhaps the answer lies not in the creature itself, but in the minds that dreamed it, minds not so different from our own, still haunted by the unknown, still searching for meaning in the shapes of beasts long gone. Deep in the heart of Central Africa lies a vast, almost primeval expanse of untouched wilderness, the Congo Basin. It's a place where dense rainforest folds into itself, where thick vines drip with humidity, and rivers wind endlessly like living veins through a landscape that seems immune to time. The air is heavy with moisture and sound, the distant cry of birds, the hum of insects, the rustle of something unseen moving just beyond the tree line. In this world of shadows and silence, a legend has persisted for generations, a creature spoken of in hushed voices, feared, respected, and sometimes believed to be real. Its name is Mokele-Mbembe, a word that, in the Lingala language, loosely translates to the one who stops the flow of rivers. Among the Baka and other pygmy peoples of the Congo region, stories of the Mokele-Mbembe are passed down through oral tradition. Described as an enormous beast with a long neck, a bulky body, and a sweeping tail, the creature is said to dwell in the murky waters of Lake Teli and its surrounding swamps. According to witnesses, it avoids humans, destroys canoes that approach too closely, and feeds on vegetation. But there's something hauntingly familiar about the descriptions. To Western explorers and cryptozoologists, Mokele-Mbembe sounds remarkably like a sauropod dinosaur, a relic from a forgotten age, a creature that, by all known scientific records, went extinct over 65 million years ago. But how could such a thing be possible? Reports of a strange creature in the Congo region began filtering into Western accounts as early as the 18th and 19th centuries, when European missionaries and colonial officials recorded stories of a river beast too large to be a hippo, too serpentine to be a crocodile. In 1909, explorer Carl Hagenbeck wrote of hearing tales from local tribespeople and hunters about a monstrous animal that sounded like a brontosaurus. His claims were met with skepticism, but they ignited a curiosity that never fully died. Over the next century, several expeditions set out to find the creature. Some returned with ambiguous findings, sightings from a distance, vague footprints, and testimonies that aligned eerily well across different regions and tribes. A few photographs emerged, blurry and inconclusive. In 1981, a Congolese biologist even claimed to have seen the creature himself, describing it as larger than a hippopotamus with a serpent-like neck. But physical evidence remained elusive. No bones, no preserved skin, no droppings, nothing to substantiate the claims beyond human accounts. And in a field governed by hard data, anecdote alone is never enough. Still, the legend persisted. And perhaps more intriguing than the idea of a surviving dinosaur is the consistency of the story. Unlike many regional myths that evolve over time or shift between tribes, the description of Mokele-Mbembe remains remarkably stable across linguistic and cultural boundaries. The same long neck, the same solitary habits, the same hostility toward boats. How is it that so many unrelated communities describe the same creature in almost identical terms? Some anthropologists have suggested a form of cultural cross-contamination, a possibility that early colonial presence and Western fascination with dinosaurs may have subtly shaped local stories. But others argue that such an influence would have altered the legend in more obvious ways, injecting it with traits or timelines that simply don't match the indigenous narratives. There's also the ecological question. The Congo Basin remains one of the least explored places on Earth, with millions of square kilometers of dense jungle and isolated waterways. New species are discovered here every year, including mammals, amphibians, and fish previously unknown to science. If a relict population of prehistoric creatures somehow survived the cataclysm that wiped out the dinosaurs, this might be the only place on the planet remote and vast enough to hide them. Then again, biology is a stubborn science. Large animals leave traces, scat, prints, nests, carcasses. The absence of such evidence is difficult to ignore, and most paleontologists dismiss the idea of a living sauropod as scientifically implausible, citing the fossil record and environmental constraints. But not all possibilities are so easily ruled out. Some researchers entertain the idea that Mokele-Mbembe may be based on a now extinct animal that lived far more recently than previously believed, perhaps a species that survived into early human memory before finally vanishing. Others speculate it could be an unknown species of large aquatic reptile or semi-aquatic mammal, misidentified due to the dense vegetation and low visibility in the region. After all, even in recent decades, the okapi, the saula, and other seemingly mythical animals have emerged from the shadows of folklore to stand, at last, under the gaze of modern science. And still, there's something more intangible that fuels the legend: a feeling. A lingering sense that some mysteries remain not because we lack the tools to solve them, but because the world still holds spaces vast enough to keep them hidden. In the shifting waters of Lake Tele, with its fog-draped banks and impenetrable depths, anything seems possible. Is Mokele-Mbembe a living fossil, a cultural memory, or simply a story born from fear and wonder? We may never know for certain, but as long as the forests whisper and the rivers wind through the heart of the Congo, the legend will remain, untamed, unresolved, and waiting. Across the frozen plains of ancient Siberia, where winter swallows the horizon and wind howls over endless stretches of snow and silence, there once roamed a creature that seems torn from the pages of legend. Its massive frame thundered across the steppe, hooves pounding against the permafrost. Its hide was thick, its build heavier than any modern horse or rhino. But what set it apart, what ensured its place in myth, was the towering horn that rose from its forehead. Long, spiraled, and formidable. This was Elasmotherium sibericum, the so-called Siberian unicorn. Its bones were first discovered in the 19th century, buried beneath ancient soils in regions stretching from Eastern Europe into Central Asia. At first glance, it resembled a rhinoceros. Indeed, it was part of the same extended family. But the skull told a different story. It was elongated, deeply domed, and bore a base wide enough to support a horn over a meter long. Not delicate, not shimmering, but real. Bone, keratin, weight. So why does a creature grounded in paleontology share a name with something from fantasy? Legends of unicorns date back millennia, long before the discovery of Elasmotherium's remains. In ancient Greek accounts, travelers spoke of single-horned beasts living beyond the known world, in India or the Scythian plains. In medieval bestiaries, unicorns were described as wild and powerful, pure yet untamable. And in Persian art and early Chinese chronicles, horned beasts are drawn with a kind of reverence, symbols of divine will, heavenly messengers walking the earth. Could these stories have been cultural echoes of Elasmotherium? Mainstream science holds that Elasmotherium went extinct around 200,000 years ago, far too early to have coexisted with modern humans. But in 2016, a surprising discovery challenged that timeline. A remarkably well-preserved fossil found in Kazakhstan was carbon dated to just 29,000 years ago, a time when Homo sapiens had already spread across Eurasia. If accurate, this would place Elasmotherium not in the distant past, but squarely within the world of early humans. Not only could they have encountered it, they could have feared it, hunted it, or revered it. Is it possible that a creature like this, a solitary, powerful, horned beast, left such an impression that it burned itself into the mythic memory of early civilizations? Elasmotherium wasn't a delicate animal. It likely stood over 6 feet tall at the shoulder and may have weighed up to 4 or 5 tons. Its horn, made of keratin like that of a modern rhino, was not a slender spiraled wand, but a heavy, solid weapon, capable of defense, of dominance, perhaps even of ritual display. And unlike today's rhinos, this beast was adapted to colder climates. It lived through ice ages, surviving alongside mammoths, giant deer, and cave lions. Yet, for reasons still unclear, it vanished. Some point to climate shifts as grasslands turned to forests and tundra. Others blame early human hunters. But the lack of clear kill sites or widespread remains from the latest period of its existence makes conclusions difficult. The truth is, we don't really know why it disappeared, or whether some isolated populations may have lingered unseen beyond the reach of record and ruin. And this uncertainty opens the door to speculation. Could sightings of large horned animals in the distant steppes have filtered southward through trade routes and migrating tribes? Could they have evolved into tales passed by word of mouth, stories of the last unicorns, strange beasts at the edge of the world? Some researchers have traced the earliest written references to unicorn-like creatures to Greek historians like Ctesias, in the 4th century BC, who described an animal in India that was wild and fleet-footed, with a single horn. While his description likely conflated several species, the persistence of the single-horned archetype is difficult to dismiss. Others look to indigenous oral traditions from the Eurasian steppes, stories that predate writing and speak of giant beasts roaming the land, now gone, but not forgotten. Could the Siberian unicorn be one of these, remembered not as fossilized bone, but as legend? Even today, the line between natural history and mythology remains blurred. We often imagine unicorns as fantastical, white, glowing, magical. But the truth may be stranger. They may have once been real, breathing animals, lumbering across the prehistoric tundra, only to vanish beneath the ice and into the realm of folklore. The bones are real. The horn once stood. And for a brief window of time, the world may have known a creature that walked between fact and fable. Is Elasmotherium the origin of the unicorn myth? Or merely a coincidence, one of nature's many reminders that what we call legend may sometimes be memory? The wind still blows across the Siberian plains, sweeping over ground that has hidden secrets for millennia. How many more bones lie buried beneath the frost? How many more creatures, like Elasmotherium, wait to be found, caught between extinction and myth, between the cold certainty of science and the quiet persistence of wonder? The dense jungles of Southeast Asia hold an atmosphere unlike any other. Towering bamboo forests stretch skyward, filtering sunlight into long, shifting beams. Thick vines drape across twisted trees, and a hush blankets the undergrowth, interrupted only by the distant call of a gibbon, or the rustling of leaves as something large, unseen, passes quietly through. This is a land shaped by time and silence, a place where much remains undiscovered. And among its most enduring enigmas is a creature that may once have ruled this landscape. A shadow from prehistory, hidden beneath the roots of modern science and the echoes of myth. Its name is Gigantopithecus blacki, the giant ape of ancient Asia. First discovered in the 1930s by a German paleontologist named Ralph von Königswald, the story of Gigantopithecus began not in the wild, but in a Hong Kong apothecary. There, tucked among boxes of powdered remedies and fossil fragments sold as dragon teeth, he found something extraordinary, an enormous molar, unlike any known to science. This tooth, and others like it, led to the identification of an extinct ape far larger than any living primate. From those first fragments, a picture began to form. Gigantopithecus stood up to 3 meters tall, nearly 10 feet, and may have weighed over 1,000 pounds. It lived in what is now southern China, Vietnam, and Thailand, thriving in the subtropical forests during the Pleistocene epoch. For millions of years, it coexisted with ancestors of modern humans and other primates. Then, some 300,000 years ago, it vanished. But why? And more intriguingly, was it ever truly gone? Fossil evidence of Gigantopithecus is scant. scientists have only recovered a handful of lower jaws and hundreds of teeth. No complete skeleton, no skull. Yet even these fragments suggest a creature of immense power, built for a life of chewing dense vegetation. The structure of its jaws and molars implies it was likely a herbivore, feeding on bamboo, fruit, and tough roots, much like the modern-day giant panda. But the forests it depended on began to change. Climate shifts at the end of the Ice Age likely reduced its habitat. Combined with competition from smaller, more adaptable primates and perhaps early human hunters, Gigantopithecus faded from the fossil record. That is the scientific story. But it is not the only one. In the remote highlands of northern Vietnam, the hill tribes speak of a great ape called the Ngoi Rung, the forest person. In the jungles of southern China, older generations tell of giant man-like creatures that once roamed the valleys and mountains. And in the mountains of Bhutan and Nepal, stories of the Yeti persist. Shaggy, upright apes seen briefly in the mist before disappearing into the tree line. Are these simply folklore, misidentifications, or could they be cultural memories, echoes of an animal that once truly walked beside us? Some cryptozoologists suggest that Gigantopithecus may be at the root of these legends. Unlike gorillas, which are native only to Africa, Gigantopithecus lived exactly where many of these myths arise. The overlapping geography is difficult to ignore, and while no modern bones or remains have ever been found to prove its survival, the jungles of Southeast Asia remain among the least explored regions on Earth. It is a realm where even large animals, like new species of deer or primates, continue to be discovered. There are, of course, challenges to the survival theory. A creature of such size would require enormous amounts of food, leave behind droppings, hair, remains, signs that should be visible. And yet, we have no complete skeleton, even from when we know it existed. The acidic soils of the region destroy bone faster than most climates, making fossilization exceedingly rare. Could that same environmental erasure be hiding something even now? Modern science remains cautious. Paleontologists stress that without fresh remains, the idea of surviving Gigantopithecus is purely speculative. But that doesn't erase the puzzle. Why does this creature linger so vividly in regional folklore? Why do footprints still appear in snowfields and riverbanks, massive and unexplained? And why do witnesses across cultures, continents, and centuries describe the same broad shoulders, the towering frame, the eyes that seem impossibly human? Perhaps Gigantopithecus really did vanish 300,000 years ago, leaving nothing but bones and mystery. Or perhaps its presence lives on in other ways, not in the forest, but in our imaginations, as a symbol of the unknown. A relic of a time when humans were not alone as the apex primates, when we shared the world with something older, larger, and perhaps wiser. In the green silence of Asia's mountain jungles, the wind moves through the canopy as it has for ages. What else moves with it? What secrets do the trees still keep? The question remains unanswered, and in its shadow, the legend of the giant ape continues to grow. The wind sweeps across the open plains of the American Midwest, bending the grasses into long, fluid waves that ripple toward the horizon. In the distance, jagged cliffs rise from the earth like broken teeth, carved by time, worn by storms. The sky here feels impossibly vast, a canvas of shifting clouds and pale blue light. It is a landscape shaped by silence and wind, a place where the sky is never still. And in the heart of this sky, if the old stories are to be believed, something once moved, something vast, something powerful. They called it the Thunderbird. Among the many tribes of North America, the Lakota, the Ojibwe, the Algonquin, the Menominee, and beyond, the Thunderbird was more than a myth. It was a presence, a sky spirit, a being of unimaginable power whose wings stirred the clouds and whose eyes sparked with lightning. Its flapping wings were said to cause thunder, its cry to shake the mountains. Some believed it brought storms to punish the wicked, others that it protected the world from forces even darker. But was the Thunderbird purely symbolic, a manifestation of weather, of divine intervention? Or could it have roots in something older, something real? In the traditions of many indigenous peoples, the Thunderbird is depicted as immense, far larger than any eagle or condor known today. Its wingspan was said to stretch across the length of a canoe, its talons capable of lifting deer, or even men. Some accounts describe it as feathered, others as part bird, part reptile. Always enormous, always otherworldly. But then come the sightings, not just from ancient stories, but from modern memory. In 1890, 2 Arizona cowboys claimed to have shot down a giant winged creature near Tombstone. They described it as leathery, with featherless wings and a wingspan longer than the length of their wagon. The body was said to resemble a serpent or dragon more than a bird. A photograph was rumored to exist, though it has never been found. The story became legend. And it wasn't the last. Throughout the 20th century, reports of giant birds have surfaced across the United States, especially in the Midwest, the Pacific Northwest, and the Appalachian Mountains. In 1977, in Lawndale, Illinois, a young boy was reportedly lifted from the ground by a bird with a wingspan over 10 feet before being dropped a short distance away. Other witnesses have described seeing shadowy shapes crossing the sky, wings stretched like sails, moving without sound. Skeptics argue these are simple misidentifications, large eagles, herons, even pelicans seen from unusual angles or in poor lighting. But in some cases, the sheer size reported seems to defy conventional biology. Is it exaggeration, human error, or something else? To begin untangling the mystery, we must turn to the past. During the Pleistocene epoch, between 2.5 million and 10,000 years ago, North America was home to an array of enormous avian species. Among them was Argentavis magnificens, the largest known flying bird to ever exist. Though its fossils have been found primarily in South America, relatives of similar size may have once soared over what is now the United States. With wingspans reaching 20 to 25 feet, these birds were more than capable of inspiring awe and fear. Closer to home, paleontologists have uncovered fossils of Teratornis merriami, a massive predatory bird with a wingspan up to 12 feet, living in parts of North America until roughly 10,000 years ago. Its strong beak, taloned feet, and soaring power suggest a creature well suited to the role of apex aerial predator. Could memories of these long-extinct species have survived in oral traditions? Could the Thunderbird be a mythologized remnant of real creatures once seen by early humans? The overlap in size, shape, and even behavior is difficult to ignore. Some researchers propose that Teratornis or similar species might have lingered far longer than currently believed, perhaps in remote, unstudied areas. The fossil record is notoriously incomplete, and extinction is often less abrupt than we imagine. Is it so implausible that one or more of these giants survived into historical times? More speculative theories take the mystery further. Some suggest that the Thunderbird may not have been a bird at all, but a type of pterosaur, a flying reptile from the age of the dinosaurs. Sightings describing leathery wings, long tails, or beakless heads have fueled this idea, though no physical evidence supports such survival. Still, the image of a forgotten relic of the Mesozoic, gliding silently above the treetops, is difficult to entirely dismiss in the face of consistent and widespread folklore. Others point to the psychological power of the sky. The human imagination has always been drawn to what flies above us, to what we can see but never reach. Perhaps the Thunderbird was born not from biology, but from thunder itself, a symbolic force of nature, a projection of the storm's violence and awe. But what if it was both? What if an ancient, now extinct creature, a real giant of the skies, once ruled the air only to vanish from physical memory and re-emerge in legend? What if early peoples witnessed it, feared it, named it, and then, over generations, gave it wings made of cloud and story? In the silence after a thunderstorm, when the sky turns dark and the wind begins to shift, it's easy to imagine something moving just beyond the clouds. A vast shape, a flash of wings, a low, distant rumble that may not be thunder at all. The bones of Territornis lie buried beneath western cliffs and canyons, but the idea of the Thunderbird remains, alive in the stories, alive in the skies. Is it gone? Or simply waiting, somewhere beyond the reach of science and shadow, to be seen again? Far beneath the surface of the world's oldest seas, where the light fades and pressure turns silence into weight, there has always been room for something vast, something ancient. The ocean is a place of darkness and myth, a realm where science and legend blur like shifting tides. It is here, in the deepest trenches of the human imagination, that we encounter one of the most enduring and terrifying beasts in recorded history. They called it the Leviathan. Its name first emerged in the texts of the Hebrew Bible, most famously in the Book of Job. There, Leviathan is described not just as a sea creature, but as a force of chaos, a being with armored scales, burning eyes, and a mouth that breathes smoke. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out, the text declares. He maketh the deep to boil like a pot. It is a vision not of an animal, but of a living storm. But what inspired such an image? Across cultures and continents, stories of sea monsters have surfaced again and again. Giant serpents, monstrous fish, beasts that swallow ships whole. Ancient Mesopotamian texts speak of Tiamat, the chaos dragon of salt water. Norse mythology brings us Jörmungandr, the world serpent that coils around the earth. In Hindu texts, there are tales of Makara, a sea beast with the head of a crocodile and the tail of a fish. The Leviathan, though, stands apart, not simply as a monster, but as a cosmic antagonist, a creature that challenges the gods, a beast that embodies the unknowable depths. So where does myth end and reality begin? In recent decades, paleontologists have uncovered fossils of an animal whose size and power seem to echo the ancient legends. In 2010, in the deserts of Peru, researchers unearthed the skull of an extinct whale, unlike any previously discovered. Measuring over 3 meters in length and filled with teeth the size of a man's forearm, this predator was named Leviathan Melville, a nod to the biblical Leviathan and to Herman Melville, author of Moby Dick. Leviathan lived around 12 to 13 million years ago during the Miocene epoch. It wasn't a passive filter feeder like modern baleen whales. It was a macroraptorial sperm whale, a top predator that likely hunted other whales, dolphins, and massive fish. With jaws that could crush bone and a skull built for ramming, it rivaled the infamous Megalodon in ferocity, and may have competed with it directly. Could this be the origin of the Leviathan myth? A long-lost memory of a giant sea predator that once ruled the oceans? It's tempting to draw the connection, but the timeline offers challenges. Leviathan vanished millions of years before humans ever recorded history. Still, the ocean has always been a graveyard of titanic life. From the mosasaurs of the late Cretaceous to prehistoric marine reptiles like Pliosaurus, the seas have been home to beasts large enough to inspire the stories that would later become myth. And then there are the sightings. Throughout history, sailors and explorers have returned from the sea with stories of immense creatures, too large, too fast, too strange to be explained. From the kraken of Scandinavian lore to 19th-century newspaper reports of sea serpents off the coast of New England, the oceans have always been a canvas for fear and awe. Were these misidentified whales, oarfish, or giant squid? Or do they point to something we still haven't found? Even today, over 80% of the ocean remains unexplored. Species are discovered every year, many in the deep sea, where pressure and darkness make research nearly impossible. Giant squid, once thought to be myth, are now a confirmed reality. Colossal squid, even more elusive, may grow over 40 feet long. And who's to say what still lurks beyond the reach of submersibles, sonar, and science? Some theorists, though far outside the scientific mainstream, suggest that Leviathan may not have been a single species, but a composite memory, a symbolic representation of the ocean's most terrifying aspects, a convergence of every unknown fin, shadow, and shape glimpsed beneath the surface. Others point to deep-sea fossils found in unexpected places, massive vertebrae, unexplained tooth marks, ancient bones with signs of trauma inflicted by something equally large. These traces hint at ancient battles we will never witness, between predators so enormous and powerful that their echoes still ripple through time. Yet, perhaps the most mysterious aspect of the Leviathan legend is not what it was, but what it continues to be. In literature, religion, and art, Leviathan is more than a monster. It is a symbol of the abyss, of nature's uncontrollable force. It represents the vastness we cannot tame. In this way, its power endures long after the last Leviathan fossil was buried beneath the sand. When we gaze out over the open ocean, we still feel it, the immensity, the weight of the unknown. A shape moving far beneath the waves, a disturbance with no name. Is the Leviathan extinct? Or did it ever truly exist? Was it bone and blood, or fire and metaphor? Perhaps it doesn't matter. The sea still holds its secrets, and somewhere beneath the churn and foam, the Leviathan waits, not as a creature, but as a question. The Jordan River winds its way through the arid lands of the Levant, carving a narrow path between sun-scorched hills and fertile valleys. In the distance, fig trees cling to the cracked earth, and herds of goats move slowly beneath a sky bleached pale by heat. This is a place where stories were born, ancient, enduring, sacred. And in one of the oldest of these stories, a figure rises from the dust of creation, a creature neither fully beast nor entirely symbol, a mystery wrapped in the rhythm of Scripture. It is known as the Behemoth. First mentioned in the book of Job, the Behemoth is described with reverence and awe. "Behold, Behemoth, which I made as I made thee. He eats grass like an ox. Behold, his strength is in his loins, and his power is in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar." It is a creature of the earth, vast, immovable, untamable, a beast so large that only its creator can approach it without fear. But what was Behemoth? For millennia, this question has stirred the minds of theologians, scholars, and scientists alike. Was the Behemoth simply a metaphor, an embodiment of divine strength and natural power? Or was it inspired by a real animal, one that once walked the land, now faded into myth? The earliest interpretations viewed Behemoth as symbolic, a poetic personification of nature's grandeur. In Jewish tradition, it is paired with Leviathan, its aquatic counterpart, Behemoth ruling the land, Leviathan the sea. Together, they represent forces beyond human control, set apart by God for some future cosmic reckoning. Yet not all interpretations stayed within the realm of allegory. Some early naturalists sought to identify Behemoth with known animals, an elephant, perhaps, or a hippopotamus. The reference to grazing like an ox, to massive strength and earthbound might, seemed to point in that direction. But there is a detail that complicates this view. His tail moves like a cedar. Elephants have small tails, hippopotamuses even smaller. Neither carries the towering tree-like motion evoked by the text. This has led to more speculative theories. One of the most debated suggestions is that Behemoth may have been inspired by a now-extinct sauropod dinosaur, a creature like Apatosaurus or Brachiosaurus, with a massive, muscular body and a tail long and powerful enough to match the image of a swaying cedar. Supporters of this view argue that early humans may have encountered the fossilized remains of these creatures and, without the framework of paleontology, constructed myths around their sheer size and strangeness. Others propose a more radical theory, that Behemoth was not just inspired by fossilized bones, but by living creatures, perhaps relict populations of large herbivorous megafauna that survived longer than we assume. Could early humans in the Near East have encountered remnants of Ice Age beasts like Elasmotherium, the massive horned mammal often linked to the unicorn myth? Or perhaps even giant proboscideans like the straight-tusked elephant? The fossil record in this region is sparse but not silent. Bones of extinct rhinoceroses and elephants have been unearthed in parts of the Middle East, and while no direct evidence links these remains to the biblical account, the possibility remains that memories of such beasts were passed down through oral tradition, gradually woven into theological and poetic form. There is also a more metaphysical angle. Some ancient texts describe Behemoth as one of the first living things, created on the 6th day of Genesis alongside humankind. In later apocryphal writings, Behemoth becomes a divine guardian, dormant until the end of days, when it will rise in some cosmic battle or sacred feast. This idea, while mythological in structure, resonates with a familiar human impulse, to believe that the earth still holds secrets, creatures older than time, waiting beneath the surface. In this context, Behemoth becomes not just a relic of a forgotten age, but a symbol of something still hidden. A reminder of the scale of life before civilization, when humans were not yet masters of the earth, but small and watchful beneath larger, older presences. What makes the Behemoth particularly fascinating is how it straddles so many lines, between theology and zoology, between scripture and science, between metaphor and memory. Its power lies not in what we know about it, but in what we don't. It speaks to that space just beyond understanding, where ancient observations become sacred texts and natural history blurs into myth. Is it possible that the Behemoth was inspired by a real creature, now extinct, now unknowable? Or was it always meant to be something more, an idea, a warning, a reflection of the vastness that surrounds us? The hills of the ancient Near East remain quiet now, but beneath their stones, fossils still sleep. And in the words passed down from generation to generation, the echo of the Behemoth lingers, massive, mysterious, unresolved. A creature that may never be fully found, and perhaps was never meant to be. South of Lima, beyond the parched foothills of the Andes, the land begins to shift, becoming drier, harsher, and almost lunar in its emptiness. The region around the town of Ica in southern Peru is a desert of rock and wind. The sun here is merciless, the sand whispering over stones that have lain undisturbed for centuries. It is in this desolate corner of the world that one of the strangest and most debated archaeological anomalies first came to light. Smooth, rounded river rocks, some no larger than a fist, others the size of a human torso, began surfacing in local markets in the mid-20th century. Their surfaces were dark, weathered, volcanic andesite, and etched into them were images, hundreds of them, then thousands. Now, more than 10,000 stones are believed to exist. They are known as the Ica Stones. The carvings depict a bewildering array of scenes, men gazing through telescopes, conducting surgeries, mapping stars, performing complex medical procedures. But most notably, and most controversially, some of the stones show humans interacting with dinosaurs. There are images of people riding what appear to be triceratops-like creatures. Others show detailed depictions of stegosaurs, pterosaurs, even tyrannosaur-like beasts, some being hunted, others being tamed. At first glance, the images seem impossible, anachronistic in the extreme. Could these be evidence of an advanced pre-Columbian civilization that possessed knowledge lost to time? Or could they be fabrications created to provoke wonder, controversy, or profit? The modern story of the Ica stones begins in earnest in the 1960s when Dr. Javier Cabrera Darquea, a respected Peruvian physician and academic, began collecting the stones. He believed them to be authentic relics of an ancient, advanced culture, one he theorized existed long before known civilizations in the Andes. Cabrera dedicated much of his life to the stones, eventually founding a private museum to house his growing collection. According to his theory, the Ica stones were created by a race of pre-Incan humans with highly developed scientific knowledge. They knew of the stars, practiced surgery, and somehow, mysteriously, lived in a world shared with dinosaurs. Mainstream archaeology was, and remains, deeply skeptical. The Peruvian government has never officially recognized the stones as authentic artifacts. Several locals have come forward over the years, admitting to carving the stones themselves, sometimes even demonstrating how they used simple tools and modern illustrations to copy the designs. For them, it was a way to earn a living from tourists and collectors. In some cases, the names of the artists were traced and confirmed. To many researchers, this was the final word. The stones were hoaxes. But others aren't so quick to dismiss the phenomenon. Among the thousands of stones collected over decades, there are examples whose surface oxidation, caused by prolonged exposure to air and time, appears consistent with genuine aging. Some stones show weathering patterns that would be difficult to fake. A few have reportedly been recovered from older excavation layers, though such claims are difficult to verify. And then there's the sheer volume. Could all of them be modern fabrications? Could the story be more complex than a simple fraud? Beyond the question of authenticity lies a deeper mystery. Why do so many of the images, real or not, portray creatures that were only reconstructed in the scientific imagination in the late 19th and early 20th centuries? How would forgers in rural Peru have such anatomical accuracy unless they had access to paleontological illustrations? Or, is it possible that some of the knowledge depicted predates that era entirely? There is also the matter of the iconography. The human figures depicted on the stones do not match any known Andean civilization in style or dress. The surgical scenes, for instance, include detailed depictions of organ transplants, C-sections, and brain surgeries, procedures that far exceed the known medical capabilities of any pre-Columbian society. The astronomical depictions are just as strange, with figures pointing to stars, planets, and symbols resembling constellations known only through telescopic observation. Were these simply the imaginative projections of the 20th century, reverse-engineered to look ancient? Or were they reinterpretations of a forgotten past, one glimpsed through myth, legend, or remnants of some lost knowledge? Cabrera believed the stones represented a global cataclysm that erased this advanced civilization, long before the rise of the Inca, even before Mesopotamia or Egypt. According to him, the stones were the preserved record of that age, a warning or testament left behind by a species aware of its own fragility. Mainstream archaeologists continue to point out the inconsistencies, the lack of archaeological context, the admitted forgeries. And yet, the Ica stones have not disappeared. They continue to be sold, collected, debated. New stones still surface, some crude, others intricate. The story refuses to fade. What do we do with artifacts, or objects claiming to be artifacts, that exist in this gray space between science and speculation, between belief and deception? Are the Ica stones the clever work of modern artisans playing to the imagination of the curious? Or are they fragments of a past we've only begun to understand? If even one of them is genuine, what would it mean for our understanding of history? And prehistory? In the dry winds of the Peruvian desert, time is both erased and preserved. Bones turn to dust, but stories endure. And in the shadows of the stones, between etched lines and ancient dreams, a question lingers, etched as deeply as the carvings themselves. What if we are not the first to remember? As the sun rises over the plains of the Indus River, a golden haze settles over what remains of one of the world's earliest urban civilizations. The earth here is dry and fractured, but beneath its surface lie the remnants of something remarkable: planned streets, advanced drainage systems, complex weights and measures. This is the heartland of the Indus Valley civilization, an enigmatic culture that thrived over 4,000 years ago alongside ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, yet remains one of the least understood. Among the many artifacts unearthed from sites like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, one particular object has drawn quiet yet persistent curiosity. It's small, often no larger than a few inches across, made of steatite, a soft stone carved with extraordinary precision. These are Indus seals, tablets bearing inscriptions in an undeciphered script, accompanied by animal motifs both familiar and strange. And on many of these seals, one figure appears again and again, a slender, four-legged creature standing in profile. Its back is arched like a bull's, its frame powerful, its neck straight and alert. But rising from its forehead is a single, unmistakable horn. Scholars call it the Indus Valley unicorn. To date, hundreds of such seals have been found depicting this horned creature, far more than any other single animal motif in the Indus corpus, always drawn from the side, always with one horn. In some seals, the unicorn appears beneath mysterious symbols, standing before ritualistic altars or beneath rows of undeciphered script. Sometimes, its body is adorned with what appear to be decorative patterns, and in rare cases, it is accompanied by human figures. But what was it? Mainstream archaeologists have generally interpreted the unicorn as a composite or stylized animal, possibly a side profile of a two-horned bull with one horn hidden from view by artistic convention. This interpretation is sensible, especially given that stylization is common in early iconography. And yet, the consistency with which the one-horn depiction appears, across regions, across time, raises questions. If it were simply a perspective issue, why no variation? Why no attempts to show both horns or render the animal from other angles? Could it be that the unicorn was not a real animal, but a symbolic one? Perhaps. But then the question becomes, symbolic of what? The seals, after all, were likely not decorative. Most scholars believe they served some administrative or ritualistic purpose, possibly as markers of identity, trade, or spiritual authority. The animals depicted may have held deeper meanings, totemic, religious, even political. Was the unicorn a sacred animal? A representation of a divine or mythological figure known only to the Indus people? Could it have signified a particular city, clan, or priestly order? Others have ventured more speculative theories. Some suggest that the Indus Valley unicorn may represent a lost species, a creature now extinct, remembered only in art. This idea finds strange echoes in other ancient cultures. In Mesopotamia, horned animals are often shown in profile, but never with such unwavering uniformity. In early Vedic texts, written centuries after the fall of the Indus civilization, There are references to a one-horned beast called the Ica, a creature associated with purity, power, and sacred knowledge. Could the Vedic Ica be an echo of the same figure from the Indus seals? There are even fringe theories suggesting that the seals provide evidence of a now-extinct proto-unicorn, an evolutionary offshoot of antelope or bovine lineages that developed a single central horn. Fossil records, however, offer no support for such a species in the region. The closest real-world counterpart would be the Elasmotherium, or Siberian unicorn, but it lived thousands of kilometers away and vanished long before the Indus civilization rose. Still, myths do not always require physical remains to persist. Could early encounters with strange horned animals, whether through trade, migration, or cultural memory, have given rise to the standardized unicorn image seen on the seals? Or was the unicorn a wholly imagined creature, a symbol of something intangible, authority, mystery, or purity? The deeper mystery remains the script that accompanies the seals. Despite decades of study, the Indus script has never been conclusively deciphered. It is made up of short sequences of symbols, many of them unique. No bilingual texts have ever been found. Without a Rosetta Stone, scholars have been forced to interpret the seals without the aid of words, relying solely on patterns, motifs, and comparison. Which means that whatever the unicorn stood for, whatever its name, purpose, or meaning, we cannot yet know. And so, the image lingers. In museums, it sits quietly in display cases, its gaze fixed forward, horn poised, frozen in time. On paper, it remains a puzzle. In the imaginations of those who encounter it, it becomes something more. A myth born not of medieval Europe, but of Bronze Age South Asia. What did the people of the Indus believe this creature to be? Was it something they revered, something they invented, or something they once saw with their own eyes? The civilization that carved these seals left behind no pyramids, no monumental inscriptions, no royal tombs. Its cities were orderly, its technologies advanced, but its voice, so far, remains silent. And in that silence, the unicorn watches. Was it ever real? Or does its power lie precisely in the fact that we still do not know? Perhaps that is what makes it so enduring. A single horn, carved in stone, quietly defying explanation. A forgotten symbol from a forgotten world, asking the same question we are. What else have we missed? The seals, after all, were likely not decorative. Most scholars believe they served some administrative or ritualistic purpose, possibly as markers of identity, trade, or spiritual authority. The animals depicted may have held deeper meanings, totemic, religious, even political. Was the unicorn a sacred animal, a representation of a divine or mythological figure known only to the Indus people? Could it have signified a particular city, clan, or priestly order? Others have ventured more speculative theories. Some suggest that the Indus Valley unicorn may represent a lost species, a creature now extinct, remembered only in art. This idea finds strange echoes in other ancient cultures. In Mesopotamia, horned animals are often shown in profile, but never with such unwavering uniformity. In early Vedic texts, written centuries after the fall of the Indus civilization, there are references to a one-horned beast called the Ica, a creature associated with purity, power, and sacred knowledge. Could the Vedic Ica be an echo of the same figure from the Indus seals? There are even fringe theories suggesting that the seals provide evidence of a now-extinct proto-unicorn, an evolutionary offshoot of antelope or bovine lineages that developed a single central horn. Fossil records, however, offer no support for such a species in the region. The closest real-world counterpart would be the Elasmotherium, or Siberian unicorn, but it lived thousands of kilometers away and vanished long before the Indus civilization rose. Still, Myths do not always require physical remains to persist. Could early encounters with strange horned animals, whether through trade, migration, or cultural memory, have given rise to the standardized unicorn image seen on the seals? Or was the unicorn a wholly imagined creature, a symbol of something intangible, authority, mystery, or purity? The deeper mystery remains the script that accompanies the seals. Despite decades of study, the Indus script has never been conclusively deciphered. It is made up of short sequences of symbols, many of them unique. No bilingual texts have ever been found. Without a Rosetta Stone, scholars have been forced to interpret the seals without the aid of words, relying solely on patterns, motifs, and comparison. Which means that whatever the unicorn stood for, whatever its name, purpose, or meaning, we cannot yet know. And so, the image lingers. In museums, it sits quietly in display cases, its gaze fixed forward, horn poised, frozen in time. On paper, it remains a puzzle. In the imaginations of those who encounter it, it becomes something more. A myth born not of medieval Europe, but of Bronze Age South Asia. What did the people of the Indus believe this creature to be? Was it something they revered, something they invented, or something they once saw with their own eyes? The civilization that carved these seals left behind no pyramids, no monumental inscriptions, no royal tombs. Its cities were orderly, its technologies advanced, but its voice, so far, remains silent. And in that silence, the unicorn watches. Was it ever real? Or does its power lie precisely in the fact that we still do not know? Perhaps that is what makes it so enduring. A single horn, carved in stone, quietly defying explanation. A forgotten symbol from a forgotten world, asking the same question we are. What else have we missed? Even now, visitors to Mediterranean caves may stumble upon fragments of ancient bone, a curve of ivory, a weathered tooth, a hollow skull with a strange opening where the face should be. The earth still whispers to those who listen, and in that whisper, the myth of the Cyclops endures, not as proof, perhaps, but as possibility, as a story born from stone, passed from hand to hand, reshaped by time, and still not entirely explained. What other myths might rest beneath our feet, waiting to be uncovered, not in ink, but in fossil? What stories did our ancestors tell, not to deceive, but to understand? The answer may lie somewhere between history and legend, where imagination meets bone. The Amazon rainforest is a world unto itself, vast, humid, and endlessly layered with life. Mist hangs in the treetops, water drips steadily from broad leaves. Somewhere in the green tangle, the calls of unseen creatures echo through the undergrowth. It is a realm of dazzling biodiversity and deep, primeval silence. A place that feels not just untouched, but unmapped, even in the modern world. And in the heart of this living labyrinth, whispered among local tribes and passed down through generations, is the legend of something massive, something strange, something that may, or may not, have ever truly gone extinct. They call it the Mapinguari. For the people of the Amazon, particularly in the remote jungles of Brazil, Peru, and Bolivia, the Mapinguari is not a tale from the distant past. It is a living, breathing presence. Descriptions vary, but certain details repeat with striking consistency. A towering, bipedal creature covered in thick reddish hair, with long, curved claws and a pungent, almost unbearable odor. Some say it stands over 7 feet tall and moves with slow but deliberate power. Others claim it has a second mouth, situated unnervingly on its abdomen. In many versions, it is described as having a hide so tough that it's impervious to bullets. A creature that makes the forest go quiet before it appears, that knocks over trees, that screams with the voice of something not quite animal, and not quite human. To Western ears, it may sound like myth, a cryptid born from the fears of a forest too vast to understand. But the legend becomes more intriguing when we step beyond folklore and into paleontology. Because in the not-so-distant past, geologically speaking, the Amazon did have such a creature. Roughly 10,000 years ago, South America was home to a group of massive, land-dwelling animals known as giant ground sloths. Among them was Megatherium, one of the largest land mammals ever to walk the earth, and its smaller cousin Mylodon, whose range may have once stretched into the fringes of the Amazon basin. These were not the gentle tree-dwellers we know today. They were heavily built, with long claws, thick fur, and powerful limbs. Though herbivorous, they were capable of standing upright and defending themselves with formidable force. The resemblance to descriptions of the Mapinguari is uncanny. In fact, some researchers have suggested that the Mapinguari legend may be a cultural memory of these now extinct sloths, a folk echo of creatures that once roamed the continent. Others have speculated that remote populations of giant sloths might have survived longer than the fossil record currently suggests, retreating into the densest parts of the rainforest, beyond the reach of science and satellite. It may sound unlikely, but it's not without precedent. Even in modern times, new species of mammals continue to be discovered in the Amazon. The rainforest hides more than it reveals. Its terrain is so vast and so impenetrable that even aerial surveys have failed to fully map it. Could a relict population of ground sloths, or a cousin species unknown to science, still survive deep within its untouched interiors? In 1895, the remains of a Mylodon were discovered in a Patagonian cave. Remarkably, the skin and dung appeared partially preserved, with a texture that seemed recent. This prompted waves of speculation at the time. Could these animals still be alive in some forgotten corner of the continent? Though radiocarbon dating later placed the remains at around 10,000 years old, the mystery hasn't entirely faded. What gives the Mapinguari legend further weight is the consistency of native testimony. Indigenous communities, many isolated from each other by geography and language, describe nearly identical creatures. Some hunters even claim to have encountered them directly, glimpsing a hulking figure vanishing into the trees, hearing guttural cries in the night, or finding enormous footprints in the mud, too large and too deep to match any known animal. And then there's the scent. Nearly every account, from modern cryptozoologists to tribal elders, mentions the Mapinguari's odor, a stench so potent it's said to repel animals and make humans dizzy. Interestingly, giant ground sloths were believed to have had well-developed scent glands and a musk-like odor, much like some of their modern descendants. Is this another clue hidden in the details of an old story? Of course, the mainstream scientific view remains cautious. Without physical evidence, bones, DNA, a verified photograph, the Mapinguari cannot be confirmed as anything more than folklore. Many biologists classify it with other cryptids, intriguing but unproven. They argue that misidentifications, exaggerations, and the blending of stories over time have created a creature of legend, not of fact. Yet, something about the Mapinguari resists easy dismissal. It is not a singular myth, it does not come from a single culture, and it echoes, in form and behavior, a creature we know once existed. Could it be that the Mapinguari is the ghost of a real animal? An echo passed down through generations, rooted in ancient memory? Or could the forest still hold its secrets? After all, the Amazon has swallowed entire cities. Why not one species? In the humid silence of the jungle, beneath the shadow of trees older than empire, the question lingers like the scent of something unseen. What, if anything, still walks among the forgotten paths of the forest? As the morning fog clings to the rolling hills and dense forests of New Zealand's South Island, The land seems to hold its breath. The air is crisp, the earth damp beneath towering ferns, and the silence is broken only by the distant rustling of leaves. It's easy to imagine a time, not so long ago, when the shadows among the trees belonged to creatures both majestic and monstrous, two species locked in an ancient and tragic balance. One was a giant without wings. The other, a raptor so large it defies belief. They were the moa and the Haast's eagle, and together they once ruled the wilds of Aotearoa. For centuries, the moa walked the land unchallenged. Flightless and formidable, these enormous birds resembled a cross between an ostrich and a myth. The largest species stood over 10 feet tall, with its neck extended, and weighed more than 500 pounds. Covered in coarse feathers, their heads were small, their legs thick and powerful. They browsed the forests and grasslands for leaves, fruits, and seeds, shaping the landscape in ways that only large herbivores can. And remarkably, they evolved with no natural predators, at least until one arrived. Haast's eagle, Hiraetus murray, was unlike any raptor alive today. With a wingspan of up to 10 feet and claws as large as a tiger's, it was the apex predator of its time. It did not hunt rodents or rabbits. It hunted moa. This eagle wasn't just large, it was powerful. Estimated to weigh over 30 pounds, its short, muscular wings were adapted not for soaring, but for maneuvering quickly through dense forest. It relied on stealth and explosive speed. When it struck, it aimed for the head or neck, using talons to crush bone and flesh in a single blow. One fossilized moa pelvis even shows puncture marks perfectly matched to the curved claws of a Haast's eagle, grim evidence of their lethal encounters. These two creatures, one herbivore, one carnivore, defined a prehistoric ecosystem found nowhere else on Earth. And then, in the blink of an evolutionary eye, they were both gone. When Polynesian navigators arrived in New Zealand around the late 13th century AD, they found a land untouched by mammals. The moa, curious and unafraid, were easy prey. Within 2 centuries, they were hunted to extinction. Without their primary food source, the Haast's eagle soon followed. It's a story grounded in science. Fossils of both animals have been found in caves, riverbeds, and middens. Radiocarbon dating confirms their existence up to the early 1400s. And yet, even with this knowledge, the mystery lingers. Because long after the last confirmed bones were buried, the stories persisted. Among Maori oral traditions, the moa and the great eagle appear not as relics, but as memory. Moa are described with vivid detail, sometimes as recent as a few hundred years ago. Their meat, said to be tough but nourishing. Their presence, feared and respected. And the eagle, known as the puakai, was not just a bird. It was a creature of power and danger, capable of carrying off children or attacking unwary travelers. Were these just echoes of a time already past, or do they hint at a more recent survival? Even early European settlers in the 19th century reported hearing strange calls in the forests or stumbling upon large, unfamiliar tracks in the mud. A few swore they'd seen birds too large to be hawks, their shadows darkening the sky. Moa sightings, too, occasionally trickled in from the remote reaches of the South Island, tales of giant birds seen at a distance, vanishing into mist. Of course, no modern evidence supports the survival of either species. No photographs, no verified footprints, no DNA. And yet, the sheer scale of New Zealand's wilderness, even today, leaves room for speculation. Vast tracts of forest and mountainous terrain remain largely untraveled. Could isolated individuals or small populations have lingered longer than we know? Some cryptozoologists have proposed that smaller, lesser-known species of moa may have survived longer in secret. They point to reports of unusual feather patterns, unidentified droppings, or strangely shaped footprints. But without proof, these remain stories, compelling but unconfirmed. The case of Haast's eagle is perhaps more haunting. Its extinction was tied so closely to that of the moa that its fate seemed sealed. And yet, what if the eagle had adapted, switched to hunting other birds, or even scavenging? Could such a large predator have shifted its role, changed its behavior, and gone unnoticed? Mainstream science says no. Extinction, once confirmed, is typically final. But history has shown exceptions. Species thought lost have resurfaced. Coelacanths off the coast of South Africa, takahe in New Zealand's own fjordland, and other so-called Lazarus species that remind us of how easily nature slips through the cracks of human observation. In the case of the moa and Haast's eagle, their bones remain, their stories endure, and their presence continues to haunt the landscape. On foggy mornings, when the hills fall silent and the trees sway in slow rhythm, it's not hard to imagine the ground shaking with the step of a giant bird, or the sudden rush of air as enormous wings descend from above. Did we truly witness their end, or have we merely lost the trail? In a land where myth and memory overlap, where oral history carries truths deeper than stone, the question remains open. Hidden not in the fossils, but in the silence of the forest itself. The asphalt seeps black and still from the ground at Rancho La Brea, in what is now the heart of Los Angeles. It bubbles up slowly, glistening beneath the sun, an ancient trap, unchanged for tens of thousands of years. From beneath this sticky surface, a graveyard of vanished creatures has emerged. Mammoths, saber-toothed cats, ground sloths, camels, and more, preserved in perfect death. But among the most frequently found, and most enigmatic, are the remains of a predator that once ruled the Pleistocene epoch. A creature now immortalized in legend and fiction, but whose true story remains far more elusive. The dire wolf. Canis dirus, as it's known in scientific circles, was larger and heavier than today's gray wolf. With a massive skull and powerful jaws, it hunted across what is now North and South America for nearly 300,000 years, thriving in a land teeming with megafauna. Fossils suggest a formidable animal, strong, social, adaptable. And yet, despite its dominance, it vanished around 10,000 years ago, along with many of the giants it hunted. But what really happened to the dire wolf? And why does its extinction still leave us with more questions than answers? Thousands of dire wolf specimens have been recovered from La Brea alone, more than any other predator. Their bones tell a story of abundance, of successful packs drawn into the tar by trapped prey, and never escaping. Unlike other canids, the dire wolf had short, broad legs, a robust build, and an exceptionally strong bite force. But its teeth were prone to wear and fracture, hinting at a diet that included bones and tougher material, possibly indicating scavenging as well as hunting. These facts paint a picture of a powerful carnivore finely tuned to its environment. Yet, despite all this, Canis dirus disappeared. Mainstream explanations point to climate change and the collapse of prey species at the end of the last ice age. As mammoths, camels, and giant bison died off, so too did the predators that depended on them. But the gray wolf, smaller and less powerful, survived. So did coyotes. Why not the dire wolf? Was it too specialized, too slow to adapt? Or was there something else? Recent genetic studies have complicated the story. In 2021, a groundbreaking study revealed that the dire wolf wasn't just a bigger cousin of the gray wolf, it was something far stranger. DNA extracted from ancient bones showed that Canis dirus split from the lineage of gray wolves over 5 million years ago. It was not just a species apart, it was a different branch of canid evolution entirely. This revelation overturned more than a century of assumptions. It meant that dire wolves were not part of the same close-knit family as modern wolves, coyotes, or dogs. They had no known living relatives. They were, in essence, the last of their kind. How does a predator survive for hundreds of thousands of years across 2 continents, then vanish completely without leaving a descendant? Did their unique lineage make them more vulnerable to ecological disruption? Or were they outcompeted by more flexible predators, wolves and humans, expanding rapidly across the same landscape? Then, there are the stories. In the myths of various Native American peoples, there are whispers of wolves that were larger, fiercer, more powerful than those alive today. In the traditions of the Pawnee, Sioux, and Apache, great wolves often appear as spirit guides or omens, creatures of wisdom and strength, but also danger. Could these stories preserve faint cultural memories of encounters with real dire wolves? Or do they reflect something deeper, an inherited awe of a predator that once ruled the night? Even in more recent times, occasional reports have surfaced, tales of oversized wolves seen in the wilds of North America, described as too big, too silent, too strange to be ordinary wolves. While these sightings are typically dismissed, they speak to something enduring in the human imagination, a lingering sense that the dire wolf may not be entirely gone. And perhaps, in a way, it isn't. Through fiction and folklore, it lives on. In modern popular culture, the dire wolf has become a symbol of lost power, of an ancient force that once prowled a very different Earth. Yet, its real history remains more mysterious than most realize. A species that left behind more fossils than nearly any other predator of its time, and yet still leaves behind no clear explanation for its disappearance. What lessons are buried in the tar alongside its bones? Was its end swift, or did it fade slowly as the world around it changed? Was it driven out by competition, or simply outlived by time? In the shifting ground of paleontology, where each new discovery rewrites the rules, the dire wolf continues to haunt the edges of scientific understanding. A creature that feels both familiar and alien. Close, yet unreachable. Its bones are dry, its DNA extinct. And yet, when the wind moves through the trees on a cold night, when a lone howl echoes across a mountain valley, the question remains: did we ever truly understand the dire wolf? Or is its story still unfinished, waiting beneath the surface, like so many secrets of the deep past? Beneath the soft layers of ancient earth at sites like Rancho La Brea and scattered across the fossil beds of North and South America, there lies the bone-white evidence of a predator that once ruled with silence and strength. The skulls are unmistakable, broad, muscular, and crowned with curved dagger-like fangs, each one a weapon of surgical precision. These were not the teeth of scavengers or opportunists. They were the signature of a hunter evolved for power, stealth, and dominance. They belonged to the saber-tooth cat. Most famously represented by Smilodon fatalis, the saber-tooth was not a tiger, as its name might suggest, but a unique predator with no perfect modern counterpart. It stalked the Ice Age plains and forests alongside mammoths, mastodons, dire wolves, and giant sloths. Weighing as much as 600 pounds, with forelimbs built for grappling and a jaw that opened nearly 120 degrees, the saber-tooth was built to bring down large prey in close quarters. A killing specialist. And yet, for all its evolutionary success, the saber-tooth vanished. Roughly 10,000 years ago, at the close of the Pleistocene epoch, the saber-tooth cat, and nearly 70% of the world's large mammals, disappeared in what scientists now call the Quaternary Extinction event. In a relatively short geological window, the Ice Age ended, ecosystems shifted, and ancient giants fell. But the saber-tooth's extinction stands out. Because of all the predators of the time, it seemed the most adapted to its role. It had numbers, range, and strength, and yet it left no descendants. Why? One prevailing theory is environmental collapse. As the climate warmed rapidly, the massive herbivores that formed the backbone of the saber-tooth's diet, mammoths, bison, ground sloths, declined. Without large prey, the saber-tooth's specialized hunting strategy became a fatal limitation. While more adaptable predators like gray wolves and cougars survived by shifting diets, the saber-tooth could not. But this explanation, while plausible, raises deeper questions. Why then did other large predators like the dire wolf suffer a similar fate, while others, like bears and smaller felines, endured? Could something else have contributed? Enter the human factor. Around the same time, early humans, Clovis hunters, armed with stone-tipped spears and expanding rapidly across the Americas, began appearing in the archaeological record. With them came pressure, competition for prey, direct hunting, and possibly even environmental modification through controlled burning. Some scientists argue that the arrival of humans created a perfect storm, shrinking habitats, dying prey, and now a rival predator. But the fossil evidence doesn't show widespread hunting of saber-tooths themselves. There are no clear kill sites, no bones marked by human tools. If humans played a role, it may have been indirect. And if so, was that enough to collapse an entire species? Another mystery lies in the saber-tooth's physiology. Those iconic fangs, while deadly, were also fragile. Despite their terrifying length, the teeth were thin and easily broken. Saber-tooths had to kill precisely, fast, efficiently, and often with the element of surprise. Did this reliance on a specific hunting strategy make them more vulnerable to sudden changes in the food chain? Was the saber-tooth too specialized for a world that demanded flexibility? Or is there something we're missing? A few researchers have begun to revisit the idea that the extinction may not have been as clean or as complete as once believed. In the remote reaches of South America, stories persist among local populations, tales of large, cat-like creatures stalking the forests, silent and powerful, with unusually long teeth. These accounts are unverified and often dismissed, but they speak to a lingering sense that perhaps, somewhere, in some forgotten corner, the saber-tooth might have lasted longer than we think. Even more intriguing is the fact that the fossil record offers gaps, not answers. While we know that Smilodon lived in large numbers, as evidenced by thousands of specimens at sites like La Brea, we still have limited data on their behavior, social structure, and population decline. Did they hunt in coordinated groups, like modern lions? Or were they solitary ambush predators? Were they truly as dependent on megafauna as we assume? Or did their diet once include a wider range of animals? Then there is the matter of their sudden disappearance. Not gradual, not over tens of thousands of years, but within a relatively narrow window of time. So narrow, in fact, that it resembles not ecological shift, but collapse. Could disease have played a role, moving through dense predator populations and wiping them out before they could adapt? Could environmental toxins from volcanic activity or methane releases have altered prey behavior or health in subtle but lethal ways? These ideas remain speculative, but they speak to how much we still don't know. For now, the saber-toothed cat remains frozen in time, a skull on display, a fang gleaming in the museum light. Its legacy endures not just in bone, but in our collective imagination, a symbol of Ice Age grandeur, a predator so perfect it may have become its own undoing. But what if it wasn't failure? What if its end was not due to weakness, but simply bad timing? What if Smilodon lived at the height of its power, and then the world changed too quickly? In the quiet of the fossil bed, in the places where tooth meets soil and mystery meets extinction, one question lingers. How does such a powerful creature disappear? And why does it still feel so close? The bogs of Ireland hold secrets in their silence. Beneath still waters and blankets of peat, time folds in on itself. Entire centuries are buried in the cold, oxygen-poor soil, preserved in layers of moss, mud, and memory. And sometimes, rising from these depths, a shape emerges. Antlers like branches of bone, a skull as wide as a table. The remains of a creature so grand in scale, so haunting in form, that it seems as though it stepped out of myth rather than biology. This is the Irish elk, Megaloceros giganteus, one of the largest deer species to have ever walked the earth. Its name is something of a misnomer. It wasn't strictly Irish, though some of the best preserved specimens have been found there. And it wasn't an elk, at least not in the modern American sense. It was more closely related to fallow deer. But what truly set Megaloceros apart, what etched it into the imagination of all who beheld its fossils, were its antlers. Up to 12 feet wide, with tines like scythes and beams thick as a man's arm, the antlers were more than weapons or ornaments. They were monuments, evolved displays of dominance, beauty, and survival. The animal itself stood nearly 7 feet at the shoulders and weighed over 1,500 pounds. In life, it must have moved with the slow, heavy grace of something fully aware of its size. But what happened to it? And why, after hundreds of thousands of years roaming across Europe and Asia, did it vanish so suddenly? The Irish elk first appeared around 400,000 years ago and survived well into the Holocene, with the youngest known fossils dated to just under 8,000 years ago. That means it coexisted with humans, not in distant memory, but in the early chapters of our own story. In fact, some cave paintings may depict the Irish elk, drawn with careful lines and a reverence that suggests more than mere observation. Scientists have long debated what caused its extinction. One theory centers on its enormous antlers. They required a tremendous amount of energy and nutrition to grow, particularly calcium and phosphorus. During times of environmental stress, when food was scarce or mineral-rich vegetation became harder to find, the energy cost of growing and maintaining such large antlers may have become unsustainable. Did the Irish elk evolve too far, pushed by sexual selection to a point of no return? It's possible, but fossils suggest the species was generally healthy up until its final decline. Antler sizes remained consistent, and body condition showed no clear evidence of malnutrition in the final generations. If overspecialization wasn't the sole cause, what else played a role? Climate change is the next suspect. At the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago, landscapes shifted rapidly. The open grasslands and tundra favored by the Irish elk gave way to dense forests and rising wetlands. The great deer, adapted for open spaces, may have found itself trapped. Too large to navigate thick woods, its antlers a liability among trees rather than an advantage. Still, even this doesn't fully explain the mystery, because Megaloceros didn't vanish everywhere at once. In some regions, it survived longer. In others, it disappeared before major climatic shifts took hold. And there's another variable, one that appears again and again in the story of Pleistocene extinction: humans. By the time the Irish elk was nearing its end, humans had spread across Europe and Asia. They brought with them new tools, organized hunting strategies, and, perhaps most significantly, a growing appetite for large game. Some archaeological sites have yielded Irish elk bones with cut marks and signs of butchery. Not many, but enough to suggest interaction. Did humans contribute to the extinction, directly, through hunting, or indirectly, by altering landscapes, overgrazing with domesticated animals, or triggering ecological shifts? And then there are the stories, darker, more speculative echoes of a time when humans and giants still crossed paths. In folklore across the British Isles and Eastern Europe, there are tales of great stags, creatures that wander the mist, antlers crowned with moss and bone, eyes like firelight. Some call them guardians, others omens. Could these legends preserve a faint memory of the Irish elk, passed down not through writing, but through story and song? Even today, the creature holds a strange power over the imagination. Its remains, displayed in museums across the world, draw crowds not because of their rarity, but because of what they suggest. That something so massive, so striking, once shared this world with us. That we lived in a time of giants, and perhaps played a role in their downfall. There are those who wonder if the Irish elk could return. With advances in genetics and the discovery of well-preserved bone material in bogs, some have speculated about the possibilities of de-extinction. But the real mystery may not lie in what we can bring back, but in what we've never fully understood. Why did such a successful species, spread across 2 continents and adapted over hundreds of thousands of years, disappear? Was it one factor, or many? A slow unraveling, or a final, unseen blow? The peat bogs still hold their silence, but every so often they give up a skull, a set of antlers, a ghost of the past. And as we stare into those empty eye sockets, the question remains: how many giants walked beside us, and how many still wait to be remembered? In a quiet room of a European museum, behind glass, stands a mounted specimen that looks like it was caught in the act of vanishing. At first glance, it resembles a zebra, but only in part. Its head and shoulders are adorned with familiar black and white stripes, stark and elegant. But those stripes fade as they move along the body, melting into a warm, unpatterned brown that covers the back and hindquarters like a memory in retreat. This is no zebra, nor is it a horse. It is something in between. It is the quagga. Once found in the vast grasslands of South Africa, the quagga was a subspecies of the plains zebra, Equus quagga, yet distinct enough to stand apart. It lived in herds, grazed across open terrain, and vanished before we had time to truly understand what we were losing. The last known individual died in a zoo in Amsterdam in 1883. With its death, the quagga became one of the first animals in history to go extinct in captivity. But even now, long after its disappearance, the mystery of the quagga remains. Why did it vanish so quickly? And what exactly was it? To colonial farmers and 19th-century hunters, the quagga was simply one of many hoofed animals roaming the veld. Less flashy than the zebra, more exotic than a horse. It was hunted for meat, for leather, and sometimes just for sport. Few thought to study it in detail. Fewer still thought to preserve its lineage. By the time scientists began to pay attention, it was already too late. What makes the quagga's story so strange is not just its extinction, but how little we understood it while it was still alive. Was it a distinct species? A hybrid? A local variant? In the 19th century, without genetic tools, answers were hard to come by. Theories abounded, fueled by sketches, pelts, and incomplete skeletons. Some argued that the quagga was a transitional form between zebras and horses. Others believed it was a separate evolutionary branch altogether, one lost to time. It wasn't until 1984, more than a century after the last quagga died, that scientists extracted DNA from preserved museum specimens. The results were surprising. The quagga was not a separate species, but a subspecies of the plains zebra. Genetically, it was close, closer than anyone had expected. Its strange half-striped coat was not the mark of divergence, but a variation within a shared lineage. This discovery raised a provocative question. If the quagga was not truly gone as a species, could it be brought back? In the 1980s, a project known as the Quagga Project began in South Africa. Using selective breeding of plain zebras that displayed reduced striping, researchers sought to breed back the quagga, gradually reintroducing the look and traits of the extinct form. Over generations, foals were born with fewer and fewer stripes, browner coats, and stronger visual resemblance to the preserved skins in European museums. But the project stirred controversy. Could this truly be called resurrection? Or was it simply cosmetic mimicry, a facsimile of something lost, without the full depth of its genetic identity? If the quagga lived on in zebra DNA, where did extinction begin and end? And beyond the science, there are stranger whispers still. For decades after the quagga's official extinction, reports of sightings continued to surface. Farmers in remote parts of the Karoo claimed to have seen striped animals unlike any zebra. Some described herds behaving unusually, more like horses than zebras. There were even unverified photos, blurry and distant, suggesting that perhaps, somewhere, a small group had survived, undetected in the wild. These sightings were never confirmed. No body, no DNA, no capture. But the stories persisted, part wishful thinking, part cautionary tale. How often do we lose species not through cataclysm, but through neglect? How many more vanished without notice, before science even knew they were there? And then there is the deeper mystery, the why of the quagga's extinction. Unlike species pushed out by sweeping ecological collapse or slow evolutionary shifts, the quagga disappeared suddenly, in full view. It was hunted to extinction not because it was rare, but because it was common, because it was useful, because it lived in a time when nature was seen not as something to protect, but something to manage and use. It is a haunting example of how quickly life can disappear when its value is measured only in terms of utility, and how fragile a species can be, even when it seems numerous, adaptable, and visible. Today, the quagga occupies a strange place in the story of extinction. It is gone, yet not fully. Lost, yet partly recoverable. It's a case where science, myth, and moral reckoning intersect. Its striped hide has become a symbol of what we once failed to see in time, and of what we might still restore, however imperfectly. But as we stand before its preserved remains, as we watch foals born in breeding programs that look eerily like their long-dead ancestors, the question lingers: can a creature truly return if we don't fully understand what it was to begin with? And more unsettling still, what else have we let slip through the cracks, unnoticed, unrecorded, quietly erased from the world before we ever knew it was in danger? The quagga's ghost may yet walk the veld, if only in memory. But its mystery, its strange in-between status, reminds us that extinction is not always an end. Sometimes it's a blur, a fading outline, a half-remembered pattern in the dust. In the frozen silence of the Siberian tundra, where the wind moves like breath over snowdrifts older than memory, the past occasionally rises to the surface, not as a whisper, but as flesh. Perfectly preserved in permafrost, a creature re-emerges, still intact, its skin wrinkled and fur thick with frozen dust. Its massive tusks curve like ancient crescent moons. Its eyes are closed, as if merely asleep. This is not a sculpture, nor a fossil. It is a woolly mammoth, returned not through time, but through ice. Mammuthus primigenius once roamed the vast grasslands of the north during the Pleistocene epoch. Towering, majestic, and well adapted to cold, it grazed across Eurasia and North America in great herds, shaping ecosystems in much the same way elephants do today. With its long, shaggy coat, insulating fat, and massive tusks, the mammoth thrived in an unforgiving world. And then, roughly 4,000 years ago, it vanished. Not entirely, and not everywhere, While most mammoths disappeared around 10,000 years ago, small isolated populations survived on remote islands off the coasts of Siberia and Alaska until as recently as 2000 BC. That's closer to the building of the pyramids than to the mammoth's Ice Age heyday. But even those last holdouts eventually died, leaving behind only bones, legends, and, most intriguingly, genetic material. It is this genetic trace that has fueled one of the most controversial questions in modern science. Can we bring the woolly mammoth back? The idea is not entirely new. As far back as the 19th century, explorers who discovered frozen mammoth carcasses speculated about revival. In the 20th century, with the advent of cloning technology, such dreams began to take a more concrete shape. But only in the last 2 decades has the debate truly entered the realm of possibility. Thanks to the preservation qualities of permafrost, scientists have been able to recover remarkably intact DNA from mammoth remains, some buried for tens of thousands of years. Not whole genomes, but fragments, enough to reconstruct large portions of the mammoth's genetic code. With this came a new ambition, not just to study the mammoth, but to resurrect it. At the forefront of this effort is a technique called genome editing, specifically CRISPR. Rather than cloning a mammoth outright, something currently impossible due to the degradation of full DNA sequences, scientists propose inserting mammoth genes into the genome of a closely related species, the Asian elephant. By altering specific traits, hair growth, fat storage, cold resistance, a hybrid creature could emerge. Not a true woolly mammoth, perhaps, but something new, something mammoth-like. A creature built not from the bones of extinction, but from the blueprint of memory. Supporters argue that such a project could have ecological benefits. Reintroducing mammoth-like animals to the tundra might help restore ancient grasslands, which reflect more sunlight than dark forests, potentially mitigating climate change by preserving permafrost. They suggest these creatures could rewild northern ecosystems, filling the niche once occupied by mammoths and stabilizing landscapes disrupted by human influence. But not everyone agrees. Ethicists, conservationists, and ecologists have raised serious concerns. Would a genetically engineered mammoth-elephant hybrid truly be the same species? Could it survive in the wild, or would it become a laboratory curiosity dependent on human care? What would the consequences be for existing elephant populations already endangered? Would we divert resources from preserving the living to reconstructing the dead? And beyond the practical questions lies a deeper unease. Are we crossing a line, playing with the mechanics of evolution in ways we barely understand? Or are we simply doing what nature has always done, but faster, guided by intention rather than chance? Some believe the line has already been crossed. There are claims, unverified but persistent, that isolated populations of mammoths may still exist. Hunters in Siberia have told stories for generations of giant, shaggy elephants seen near rivers at night, or of strange tracks vanishing into melting snow. No hard evidence has ever emerged, but the survival of mammoths until just 4,000 years ago suggests that extinction may not always be a clean break. In the most remote and least explored parts of the world, could one or two have slipped through the cracks? Unlikely, but not impossible. And even if none remain, the idea of resurrection blurs the boundary between the living and the lost. Because perhaps extinction, too, is becoming a spectrum. The mammoth was not just a creature, it was a symbol of an entire lost world. It coexisted with early humans, inspired ancient carvings, stood at the edge of memory as the Ice Age faded. Now, it exists in freezers, in DNA sequences, and in our scientific imagination. The question isn't just, can we bring the mammoth back, but should we? Would its return offer redemption for a species lost to hunting and warming? Or would it become a monument to our own power, to our ability to undo death, at least partially, without understanding the full cost. In the icy stillness of the Siberian permafrost, the mammoth sleeps, but science is knocking at the door of its long, cold tomb, and the answer we choose may say more about our future than about the past. What does it mean to bring back a ghost? And if we succeed, will we recognize what we've raised? The sun hangs low over the Badlands of South Dakota, casting long shadows across the crumbling layers of ancient sediment. This is a landscape shaped by deep time, where wind and erosion slowly reveal the bones of a world long vanished. In the soft reddish rock of the Hell Creek Formation, paleontologists have uncovered creatures both familiar and strange: tyrannosaurs, triceratops, armored giants, and agile hunters. But among these relics of the late Cretaceous, one fossil stood out, not because of its size or menace, but because of how utterly out of place it seemed. Its body was bird-like, its arms feathered and powerful. It had long legs made for running, claws for grasping, and a beak, sharp, toothless, and expressive. From head to tail, it looked less like a monster and more like something conjured from a myth. A chimera of dinosaur and bird, predator and prankster. Its name is Anzu Wyliei, and it is unlike anything we've ever seen. Nicknamed the chicken from hell by the scientists who described it, Anzu was part of a group of dinosaurs known as oviraptorosaurs, a family that blurs the line between classic reptilian predators and the avian descendants they would eventually give rise to. But even among its kin, Anzu is an anomaly. Roughly 11 feet long and standing 5 feet tall at the hip, it lived around 66 million years ago, just before the mass extinction that ended the age of the dinosaurs. Its bones suggest an agile creature, with strong hind limbs and long arms tipped with sharp claws. But it's the skull that captivates most. High-crested and beaked, its head is more reminiscent of a cassowary or parrot than a reptile. Some even speculate that, like its modern bird cousins, Anzu may have had brightly colored feathers, used in courtship displays or for signaling in its forested environment. But if Anzu Wyliei seems like something from mythology, perhaps that's no accident. The genus name Anzu comes from a Mesopotamian demon bird, a feathered beast from the underworld, part lion, part eagle, and wholly supernatural. It's a fitting choice, because while Anzu is grounded in fossil record and anatomical study, it also carries an aura of the unknown. What role did it play in its ecosystem? Was it a hunter, a scavenger, an opportunist? Could it have been omnivorous, feeding on plants, small animals, eggs? Its sharp beak and claws suggest predatory tendencies, but its anatomy also allows for flexibility. Unlike most classic theropods, it lacks teeth entirely. What kind of animal, at the edge of the dinosaur era, evolved to abandon such a fundamental feature? Was Anzu ahead of its time, or a product of deep specialization that vanished in the Great Extinction? The fossils of Anzu also raise questions beyond its physical form. It lived in what is now North America, a place once teeming with diverse, competing dinosaur lineages. And yet, its oviraptorosaur relatives were previously thought to be largely confined to Asia. The discovery of such a well-preserved, advanced specimen in North America suggests a more complex and dynamic exchange of species across prehistoric continents than we had previously imagined. Could there have been unknown migration routes? Lost ecosystems where bird-like dinosaurs evolved independently? Or have we simply not yet uncovered the full picture? There are other puzzles. The Anzu fossils, found in fine sedimentary layers, show signs of rapid burial, perhaps the result of floods or sudden environmental shifts. Some researchers have wondered whether these creatures were already facing stress before the final asteroid impact. Were they in decline? Were they survivors clinging to the last habitable forests of their world? And then, there's the unsettling question of behavior. Unlike most of its relatives, Anzu appears to have had a more expressive skull, perhaps even a mobile crest. Some paleontologists have speculated that these features were used not just for display, but for social communication, suggesting an intelligence and complexity of behavior that continues to surprise us in theropod species. Could these animals have been more social than we thought? Territorial? Vocal? There are no definitive answers, but the questions themselves point to something larger. Anzu Wyliei doesn't just challenge our expectations of what a dinosaur should look like, it disrupts them. It occupies a space that feels both ancient and strangely modern. It reminds us that evolution doesn't move in straight lines, that for every predator with teeth like knives, there might be another, just as successful, with feathers and a beak. In many ways, Anzu is a symbol of what paleontology is only beginning to uncover, a lost world full of nuance, color, and life that defies the grim and dusty stereotypes of dinosaurs. These were not mindless monsters. They were diverse, adaptive, and often deeply strange. How many more Anzus are buried in the stone, waiting to be found? How many creatures have already vanished from the fossil record entirely, leaving behind only hints in the genes of their descendants? The bones of Anzu Wyliei now rest in museum drawers, studied and scanned, reconstructed and rendered. But the mystery it represents remains very much alive. What else moved through those ancient forests, light-footed, sharp-eyed, and feathered, before the final night fell? And how much of that world still lingers in the wings of birds overhead, carrying traces of demons, dancers, and dreams, too strange for extinction to erase? In the remote wilderness of Australia's Northern Territory, where ancient sandstone cliffs rise like rust-colored sentinels from the scrubland, the land itself feels alive with memory. The air is dry, the silence broken only by wind and bird call, and the rocks, baked by millennia of sun, hold more than just geological time. They hold art, stories, visions etched into stone by hands long gone. Here, in protected sites like Kakadu National Park and Arnhem Land, some of the oldest known rock art in the world can be found. Faded but still legible, vibrant with ochre and ash, the paintings depict hunters, spirits, and animals. Some familiar, others eerily alien. Kangaroos leap alongside birds, fish, and turtles. Human figures are drawn in motion, with spears and nets, dancing or hunting. But among them, in shaded rock shelters and weathered overhangs, are images that defy easy explanation. Creatures that do not match any species alive today. Beasts with massive limbs and long necks, some with reptilian tails, others with bird-like heads. And a few so strange, so distinct, they raise an unsettling question. What exactly were the artists trying to show? One of the most discussed figures is found in the Wandjina rock art tradition. These beings, drawn with large round heads and big dark eyes, are often mistaken by modern viewers for something otherworldly. While Aboriginal tradition describes them as ancestral spirits, creators of rain and life, some outsiders have speculated wildly, suggesting extraterrestrial encounters. But beyond the sensationalism, there is something undeniably strange about their timeless gaze. Even more mysterious, however, are the depictions of extinct megafauna, animals that scientists believe vanished more than 40,000 years ago. In the ancient art of Arnhem Land, there are figures that closely resemble the Genyornis, a giant flightless bird believed to have stood over 6 feet tall. Others appear to show Diprotodon, the largest known marsupial, resembling an oversized wombat or bear. There are even outline figures that some interpret as Megalania, a massive predatory lizard believed to have once hunted across Australia's ancient plains. According to mainstream science, these animals would have gone extinct not long after humans first arrived on the continent, somewhere around 50,000 BC. Climate change and human activity, including hunting and the use of fire, are thought to have contributed to their disappearance. Yet some of these rock paintings appear to be much more recent, just a few thousand years old by some estimates. Could the dating be wrong? Or did these species survive far longer than we believed, living in isolated pockets while their memory was preserved in ochre on stone? One of the most debated examples is the so-called Bradshaw art, or Guion figures. These elegant, elongated human forms are often painted alongside animals that seem out of place, quadrupeds with strange proportions, sometimes drawn with armor-like hides or extended snouts. The precision and style are different from later Aboriginal traditions, and some researchers have suggested they may represent an earlier phase of occupation or even a now-lost cultural group. Others argue they may simply reflect symbolic or spiritual visions, not literal observations. But even when allowance is made for symbolism and artistic license, the specificity of some of the depictions remains difficult to dismiss. How could artists consistently reproduce creatures they supposedly never saw? Were the stories so vividly passed down that the images remained accurate across thousands of years? Or were there survivors, relics of a forgotten ecosystem, still roaming remote parts of the continent long after the textbooks say they should have vanished? There are modern accounts, too. Strange footprints found in the outback, unexplained noises in remote regions, even rare sightings of monster lizards or giant birds. Most are easily dismissed. But they echo something, the idea that perhaps, in a land as vast and unyielding as Australia, the past is not as buried as we think. Some scientists urge caution. Dating rock art is notoriously difficult. The pigments used are organic, and exposure to the elements erases clues over time. Without precise dating, we are left with educated guesses and stylistic comparisons. And yet, as new methods emerge, like uranium series dating and high-resolution pigment analysis, some of the timelines are beginning to shift. What if some of these paintings really are younger than the animals they show were believed to have gone extinct? What if the artists were documenting rather than imagining? Traditional Aboriginal knowledge complicates the story even further. For many Indigenous Australians, these paintings are not abstract. They are records, living memory, encoded in pigment and place. Elders speak of creatures that once lived and are now gone, not in mythological terms, but in historical ones. The line between spiritual and physical is not drawn in the same way. Perhaps what seems like legend to an outsider is memory to those whose ancestors watched these animals vanish or helped them do so. So what are we looking at when we stare at these ancient beasts in ochre and charcoal? A prehistoric bestiary, a dreamscape, a record of survival. As the sun sets across the outback, the rock faces glow with fading light, and the creatures within seem to stir. Not alive, but not entirely gone either. Caught between art and history, science and spirit, they linger on the stone, waiting. How many stories have we forgotten to ask? And how many more are still painted quietly into the rocks, preserved not in bone, but in the minds and hands of those who knew a world very different from our own? High in the mountains of eastern Lebanon, where golden light touches windswept stone and silence clings to the ruins, the ancient city of Baalbek rises like a memory carved in limestone. Massive columns soar above crumbling foundations, the remnants of what was once a colossal Roman temple complex. But beneath the familiar grandeur of empire lies something far older and far stranger. At the heart of Baalbek stand some of the largest stones ever quarried by human hands. The Trilithon, a trio of limestone blocks each weighing over 800 tons, sits within the base of the Temple of Jupiter. Nearby lies the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, estimated at over 1,000 tons, abandoned mid-quarry, half extracted from the earth. These megaliths have stirred debate for centuries. How they were moved, why they were used, and who first shaped them remain questions without consensus. But scattered among these monolithic foundations and weathered walls is another, often overlooked mystery: stone carvings that depict animals not easily explained. Worn by centuries of wind and time, these reliefs are often faint, mere outlines etched into massive stones, blending into the architecture unless one knows where to look. Some are recognizable: lions, bulls, and eagles, creatures of power and myth common to ancient symbolism. But others are not so easily identified. Some carvings show beasts with massive bodies and elongated necks. Others depict hybrid creatures, part feline, part reptilian, etched with strange proportions. There are animals with exaggerated tusks, oversized limbs, or bony ridges that seem unlike anything native to the region. One particular relief, faded and fragmented, appears to show a quadruped with a thick torso and sweeping back, an image some claim resembles the profile of a woolly mammoth. Mainstream archaeologists argue that many of these figures are stylized representations, products of artistic license rather than zoological record. They point to the widespread use of composite animals in ancient art: sphinxes in Egypt, Lamassu in Mesopotamia, griffins in Persia. Baalbek, they argue, was no different. A fusion of Roman, Phoenician, and possibly even pre-Roman influences, blending real and symbolic imagery for ceremonial or decorative purposes. But there are other voices, more cautious, more speculative, that ask different questions. What if some of these carvings are not stylized fictions, but memories? Could they represent creatures seen not in myth, but in life? Is it possible that the people who first shaped the foundation stones of Baalbek remembered, or even encountered, megafauna, remnants of the Pleistocene that survived longer in isolated regions of the Levant? We know that elephants, now extinct in the Middle East, once roamed parts of the ancient Near East. Fossils of large herbivores, hippopotamuses, aurochs, and even rhinos have been found throughout the region, dating back tens of thousands of years, and the towering shadow of cultural memory is long. Stories, passed orally for generations, can preserve astonishing detail. Could the same be true for images carved into stone? Even stranger, some carvings appear not just as isolated figures, but within ritual or architectural contexts, positioned at thresholds, atop columns, or along walkways, as if meant to guard or witness. Were they symbolic protectors, representations of power? Or do they hint at something deeper, an inherited reverence for beings now lost? Baalbek's earliest foundations are often attributed to the Roman era, around the 1st century BC. But evidence suggests that the site's sacred significance stretches back much further, perhaps to the Phoenicians, or even to prehistoric cultures whose names and languages are long forgotten. The scale and precision of the stonework hint at knowledge, and perhaps stories, that were already ancient by the time Rome arrived. Local folklore surrounding Baalbek adds further layers to the enigma. According to some legends, the site was built by giants, or even by the biblical figure Cain, who was said to wander east after being exiled. Other tales speak of beasts of old that once lived in the valley, giant animals that helped move the stones or guarded the place before the temples were raised. Such myths, while not historical, echo a recurring theme: that Baalbek is a place where the impossible once seemed real. Could these carvings be remnants of an earlier worldview, one where humans and giants, beasts and gods, coexisted not just in belief, but perhaps in memory? We may never know. Many of the carvings are fragmentary, their edges worn by time. Others may lie buried beneath modern structures, waiting to be uncovered. And some may have already crumbled away, their meanings lost to erosion and silence. But they remain, enough of them, just faint enough to stir doubt. Enough to raise the possibility that what we see at Baalbek is not just a marvel of stonework, but a layered text of the past, myth and memory carved together, resisting easy translation. What animals did the builders of Baalbek truly know? And what stories, what visions of power, fear, and awe did they choose to preserve, not in words, but in the permanence of stone? As twilight deepens across the ruins and the shadows lengthen between the stones, the beasts carved into the walls seem to shift once more, silent guardians of a truth half seen, half forgotten, still waiting to be understood. Along the slow, winding banks of the Nile, where reeds sway in the golden light of sunrise and ibis wade through shallow waters, the ancient world of Egypt still whispers through stone and sand. Amid hieroglyphs carved into temple walls and texts inked onto papyrus, a bird appears again and again, regal, radiant, and shrouded in layers of symbolism. A creature both sacred and elusive, perched at the edge of life and myth. It is known as the Bennu bird. Often depicted with long legs, a slender neck, and a two-feathered crest, the Bennu was closely associated with the heron, particularly the gray heron found along the Nile Delta. But the Bennu was never just a bird. In Egyptian cosmology, it was a symbol of creation, rebirth, and divine power. Said to have emerged from the primordial waters of Nun at the beginning of time, the Bennu perched atop the Benben stone, the sacred mound around which all creation took shape. It was linked to the sun god Ra, the soul of Osiris, and the eternal cycle of death and renewal. But what was the Bennu truly? Was it merely symbolic, an embodiment of celestial order? Or could it have been inspired by a real, now extinct creature that once captured the awe of early Egyptians? Mainstream Egyptologists identify the Bennu with the yellow-billed heron, or perhaps a species of giant heron, once common across the Nile floodplains. Its elegant form and solitary behavior could have inspired the image of a divine bird, standing alone at the dawn of time. In some depictions, the Bennu has plumage of gold and crimson, colors not typical of native herons, but rich with symbolic weight. These details, scholars argue, likely reflect the mythological status of the bird rather than its biology. And yet, some elements remain difficult to reconcile. In the Book of the Dead, the Bennu is described as a bird of radiant fire, closely tied to the sun's rising and setting, often associated with the temple of Heliopolis, where it was believed to appear in cycles. According to certain texts, the Bennu bird lived for 500 years, then built a nest of aromatic wood, set it ablaze, and was reborn from the ashes, a myth that would later influence the legend of the phoenix in Greek and Roman tradition. But before the phoenix was ever imagined, the Bennu stood watch over time itself. Could the origin of such a myth have been rooted in something more than metaphor? Some researchers have speculated that the Bennu might have been inspired by a now-lost species of bird, perhaps a giant, migratory heron, or even an African cousin of the now-extinct Madagascan elephant bird, a massive, flightless creature that persisted until roughly 1,000 years ago. While no direct evidence connects the elephant bird to ancient Egypt, it raises a broader possibility that early cultures, through trade, travel, or fossil discovery, encountered animals no longer living and preserved their memory in myth. It's worth noting that Egypt's long and storied past includes not only written records, but a deep connection to the natural world. Ancient Egyptian priests were among the first naturalists, observing and documenting birds with remarkable accuracy. Their temples often included aviaries, and they mummified sacred birds in vast numbers. The sacred ibis, associated with Thoth, is a well-documented example, but the Bennu is always kept apart, singular, and profoundly cosmic. Could it be that a rare or seasonal bird, appearing only briefly and in dazzling plumage, triggered the imagination of early observers? Or could the Bennu represent something even stranger? Some fringe theorists have pointed to the uncanny parallels between the Bennu myth and later stories of the phoenix across the Mediterranean and Near East. The cycle of death, fire, and rebirth appears in multiple cultures over millennia. Was this a shared symbol, a universal archetype? Or could it point to a shared observation, a bird or phenomenon, once real, now lost? In rare instances, ancient peoples may have come across fossilized remains of large birds, bones eroded from the cliffs or sands, unfamiliar and massive. Could the sight of such remains have contributed to the image of a bird that transcended life and death? One curious thread lies in the solar aspect of the Bennu. More than a heron or holy symbol, it was a being tied to the rising sun, to renewal after darkness, to the very pulse of existence. In this way, the Bennu was not just a divine creature. It was a cosmic mechanism, part of the natural and spiritual rhythm of the universe. But as centuries passed and dynasties fell, the Bennu slipped further into abstraction. No physical remains, no definitive species, just stone, pigment, and myth. The creature that may once have inspired fear, reverence, or awe faded into metaphor, burning brightly in the imagination, then vanishing into the sands. And yet, its wings still cast a long shadow. What inspired the first vision of the Bennu bird? Was it a heron seen through sacred eyes, or the last whisper of a species now gone? Was it shaped by observation or by longing, for meaning, for cycles, for rebirth? The temples of Heliopolis lie mostly in ruins now. The great obelisks stand alone, their inscriptions worn thin by time. But somewhere in the silence between stone and sunrise, the Bennu may still rise, not in flame, but in memory. A mystery carried on wings of fire, forever circling the dawn. In the wind-swept plains of prehistoric South America, long before the rise of large carnivorous cats or saber-toothed predators, another kind of hunter ruled the land. Its presence was unmistakable, towering nearly 10 feet tall, its massive legs built for speed, its curved beak capable of crushing bone. This was not a dinosaur. It was a bird, but not like any bird we know today. They are known as the terror birds, the Phorusrhaxidae, a family of giant flightless avian predators that once stalked the ancient landscapes of South America and beyond, their reign lasting millions of years. With fierce eyes and deadly speed, they were among the most formidable land predators after the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. Fossils show that these birds thrived from around 60 million years ago to as recently as 1.8 million years ago, and perhaps, some argue, even later. Their bones have been found from Argentina to Florida, suggesting a range that expanded as tectonic shifts allowed South American species to migrate northward. But the most complete remains come from places like Patagonia, where ancient lake beds preserved their bones in near-perfect detail. The largest known species, Kelenken, stood nearly 3 meters tall and wielded a skull over 2 feet long, making it one of the largest avian skulls ever discovered. With its hooked beak and thick neck muscles, Kelenken likely dispatched prey with swift, brutal efficiency, grabbing small mammals or reptiles and shaking them violently until the bones gave way. These were not grazers or gentle giants. They were apex predators. And yet, for all their power, the terror birds disappeared. Why? The mystery is complicated by their sudden and seemingly total extinction. Some theories suggest that their decline began with the Great American Biotic Interchange, when the Isthmus of Panama rose above sea level around 3 million years ago, allowing mammals from North America to pour into South America. These newcomers included large cats, bears, and nimble canids, competitors the terror birds had never faced. Did they simply lose the arms race of predation, outpaced by pack hunters, outmatched by species that could strike from multiple directions? Other researchers point to changing climates. As grasslands expanded and forests receded, the landscapes these birds dominated began to shift beneath their feet. Their speed and size may have once been advantages, but in a changing world, they may have become liabilities, especially if prey grew scarcer or more elusive. Still, not all agree that environmental change alone sealed their fate. Scattered reports suggest something more unsettling: the possibility that the terror birds may have survived longer than we think. In Patagonia, some indigenous legends speak of giant birds with terrifying cries, capable of outrunning horses and vanishing into rocky passes. In Uruguay and Brazil, early colonial explorers described encountering ostrich-like beasts, far larger and more aggressive than any known rhea. In the Pleistocene fossil record, bones of Titanus walleri, one of the last known terror birds, have been found alongside remains of early human tools. Was this a coincidence of sediment and time? Or could there have been a brief, shadowed overlap when early humans glimpsed the last of these monstrous birds? Unlike mammoths or saber-toothed cats, no cave paintings or confirmed cultural references to terror birds have yet been found. But the lack of evidence is not proof of absence. In regions where preservation is poor and where early human populations were sparse and mobile, stories may have survived only in oral traditions, long since lost. Even their behavior remains speculative. Did they hunt in pairs? Did they defend territory or follow prey like wolves across open plains? Did they vocalize? And if so, what did that sound like? Low, booming calls echoing through the scrublands. One compelling question lingers in the fossil record itself. Some terror bird skulls show signs of injury and regrowth, suggesting combat, either with rivals or prey that fought back. Others have unusually thick bone at stress points in the legs and neck, possibly adaptations to withstand the brutal forces of their own attacks. This wasn't a bird that simply pecked. It slammed, it crushed, it killed. But what does that say about their intelligence, their social behavior, or their awareness of danger? Could they learn? Could they adapt? And if so, why didn't they survive? There are no living relatives that match their scale or ferocity. The closest are small ground-dwelling birds like Seriemas, nimble, clever, and carnivorous, but hardly terrifying. Their distant cousins remain, but the true terror has vanished. Or has it? From time to time, cryptozoologists propose sightings of oversized flightless birds in remote parts of the Americas, large enough to resemble an ostrich, but moving alone, silent and swift. Most are dismissed. Misidentifications, legends, imagination. But they echo the same question that arises again and again in the wake of extinction. When does a species truly vanish? And when do we simply stop looking? The bones of the terror birds now sit in museums, reconstructed, posed in mid-stride, frozen forever in imagined pursuit. But the world they inhabited, the one they ruled with speed and savagery, is gone. And what remains is a silence almost too large for wings to fill. A silence that leaves us wondering, what else might have moved through that ancient dust, unseen, unmatched, and not entirely forgotten? Deep within the crumbling pages of medieval bestiaries, scrawled in ink and illuminated with careful gold, a creature appears again and again. Not large, but terrible. Not winged, but feared beyond reason. It is said to kill with a glance, poison wells with its breath, and leave scorched earth in its silent path. Serpent, rooster, demon, myth. They called it the Basilisk. The name itself comes from the Greek basiliskos, little king, a nod to the crown-like crest sometimes shown on its head, or perhaps to the regal terror it was said to inspire. In European lore, the basilisk was believed to be born from a serpent's egg incubated by a rooster, or in some versions, from a toad. This strange hybrid birth only deepened the mystery, reinforcing the idea that the basilisk was a creature out of balance, outside the natural order. But was it ever real? In Renaissance Europe, the belief in the basilisk was no passing fancy. Accounts of its destruction were written in earnest. Physicians recorded cases of people allegedly killed by merely seeing the creature. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, described it as a small snake from North Africa, no more than a foot long, yet so toxic that it could kill shrubs, split stones, and leave a trail of death wherever it slithered. Some claimed it had a venomous sting, others that it breathed fire. But in all versions, one trait remained consistent: its gaze, a deadly stare that could kill instantly. To modern readers, these stories sound like allegory, yet they persisted across centuries and cultures. Why? What gave the myth such enduring power? Some researchers believe the basilisk legend may have originated from misidentifications of real animals. The spitting cobra, native to North Africa and the Middle East, can eject venom several feet, aiming directly at the eyes of predators. A direct hit can cause temporary or even permanent blindness. Could early encounters with this snake have inspired tales of a creature that could kill with a look? Another possibility lies in the rooster connection, a detail unique and puzzling. In many cultures, roosters were seen as symbols of vigilance and divine power. But in the basilisk myth, they become the agents of something unnatural. Could this element reflect an older, forgotten symbolism, something drawn from ancient beliefs about hybrid creatures, omens, or divine punishment? Interestingly, medieval texts often describe ways to defeat a basilisk. The most common method, placing a weasel in its den. Weasels, believed to be immune to the basilisk's venom, would attack and kill it on sight. Another defense was a mirror, a device that turned the basilisk's own gaze against itself, causing it to die from its own reflection. These solutions sound more like metaphors than tactics, symbolic tools against evil, corruption, or the unseen. But could they also hint at deeper truths? In some versions of the story, the basilisk lives in ruins, deserted castles, collapsed cities, places once alive, now silent. This consistent setting raises an intriguing question. Was the basilisk meant to explain the mystery of abandoned places? Did travelers stumble upon ruins where death had come swiftly, through plague, poisoned water, or gas, and create the idea of a hidden killer to explain what they could not see? Some historians suggest just that. In a world without modern science, diseases like anthrax or black mold, leaking from old wells or buried cellars, could create real danger, killing animals, sickening those who entered. The result? Stories of invisible death, of poisoned air, of cursed breath and fatal sight. Yet for all the rational explanations, the basilisk still resists full interpretation. In art, it shifts form, sometimes serpent, sometimes lizard, sometimes rooster with a serpent's tail. It defies classification, existing at the crossroads of reptile, bird, and myth. And while natural history sought to tame it, folklore kept it alive. Some cryptozoologists point to the basilisk as a case of cultural fossil memory, a distorted recollection of an extinct creature, perhaps something akin to a prehistoric reptile glimpsed in fossil form, misunderstood as recent and deadly. Others propose that it may reflect sightings of unknown species, rare, venomous animals living in hidden environments, later absorbed into legend. In the New World, early explorers brought the basilisk myth with them. Tales of venomous reptiles, massive lizards, and jungle-dwelling beasts merged with indigenous folklore to give birth to new versions, chimeras of the old world and the unknown. Even today, the word basilisk lives on in popular imagination. It appears in novels, films, and games, always deadly, always watching. But the deeper question lingers beneath the fiction. Where did the basilisk truly begin? Was it born of fear, of serpents, disease, or the dark? Was it a memory of something now extinct? Or was it never about a creature at all, but about the idea of death, silent, sudden, and unavoidable? In dusty vaults, museum cabinets hold shriveled snakes labeled basilisk, once shown as proof to the curious. They are nothing more than taxidermied hoaxes, sewn together fish and lizard parts, a nod to the enduring power of myth. But the real mystery is not in the object, it's in the belief. How could a creature so small, so inconsistently described, leave such a large shadow? And in the quiet spaces between superstition and science, what other legends still wait to be seen, not as fantasy, but as echoes of something we no longer recognize? Perhaps the basilisk never lived in the world as we know it, but it may still live in the places we dare not look. In the windswept marshlands of northern Europe, where the North Sea grinds endlessly against the flat, low-lying coasts of Friesland, there exists a silence that feels old, older than any one story, older than the sea itself. The dunes whisper in old Frisian, the rivers curve like ancient scars, and buried beneath layers of silt and salt lies a text, half dismissed, half feared. It is called the Oera Linda Book. Bound in mystery and controversy, this 19th-century manuscript claims to be a chronicle of a long-lost civilization, an ancient Frisian culture that once spanned from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean. Written in a language resembling archaic Frisian and presented as a collection of histories, laws, and warnings, it has long been denounced by scholars as a hoax or literary invention. And yet, within its pages are glimpses of something strange, something that does not feel entirely fabricated. One passage, in particular, stands out. It speaks of a monstrous creature from the depths of the sea, vast, unpredictable, and deadly. Described in unnerving detail, it emerges from the northern waters during a time of great upheaval. It is not a god, nor a beast of myth. It is spoken of as real, as a threat, and as part of the world's undoing. The text describes the creature as longer than 10 ships, with a head as large as a house, and eyes that glowed like the moons above the flood. It thrashed in the waters during violent storms, and was said to bring destruction not only to sailors, but to the very land itself. When it came ashore, whole coastlines vanished. It left behind crushed ships, poisoned fish, and silence. What was this sea monster? Most who encountered the Oera Linda book have taken such descriptions as metaphor, or worse, fabrication. Critics argue the manuscript is a 19th-century forgery, created by Dutch intellectuals to parody biblical language or to promote nationalist myth-making. And indeed, the style echoes scripture and epic poetry, blurring the line between history and allegory. But what if some of its images were drawn not from imagination, but from fragments of folk memory? Northern European waters have always been dangerous. The North Sea is shallow and violent, its tides extreme, its storms swift and merciless. Over centuries, entire villages have been claimed by the waves. Islands have appeared and disappeared. The legend of Doggerland, a submerged landmass that once connected Britain to the mainland, has fueled speculation for years. Some believe that great floods recorded in myth may correspond to real, devastating sea level rises in the ancient past. Could the sea monster described in the Oera Linda book be a symbolic memory of a cataclysmic event? A tsunami? A massive underwater landslide? Or something else, something seen by sailors, feared by coastal tribes, and passed down in story until it became something more than memory? In the same regions where the Oera Linda book is said to originate, old mariner tales speak of creatures beneath the waves: kraken, Leviathan, sea serpents with eyes like lanterns and bodies that could capsize ships. For centuries, such stories were dismissed. But in recent decades, the ocean has begun to reveal its secrets. Giant squid, once considered mythical, are now known to exist, with eyes the size of dinner plates and bodies stretching more than 40 feet. Deep-sea fish with bioluminescent lures drift through the dark like alien stars. And there are still vast portions of the ocean, especially in the Arctic and subarctic zones, completely unmapped. Some paleontologists point to long-extinct marine reptiles, like mosasaurs and pliosaurs, as possible ancestors of sea monster myths. Though believed to have vanished by 66 million BC, their fossils suggest animals so strange and immense that even their bones feel mythical. Could ancient peoples, navigating shallow waters, digging into cliffs, have unearthed such remains and imagined them as living things? Could the sea monster of the Oera Linda book be a vestige of that collective imagining? There is another theory, one far more speculative, but no less intriguing. Some researchers have noticed parallels between the creature's appearance in the text and known accounts of seismic sea waves. In certain descriptions, the monster's arrival is accompanied by the rising of the waters, the tearing of the earth, and a great groaning from the sea. These phrases, while poetic, mirror how coastal communities might describe the impact of an undersea earthquake, especially if they lack the scientific language to interpret it. Could the monster have been the ocean itself, rising in a single devastating wall, sweeping the land clean in a day? Or was there something more? A strange and often overlooked line in the Oera Linda text mentions the creature singing beneath the waves, a sound that causes illness and despair. Some believe this was a flourish, a metaphor for fear. Others wonder whether the text is describing infrasound, low-frequency vibrations generated by seismic or underwater phenomena, which can cause anxiety, nausea, and even hallucinations in humans. If so, the sea monster might not have had a body, but a sound, a presence, something sensed more than seen. The Oera Linda book may never be fully accepted as authentic history. Its contradictions and anachronisms make it difficult to treat as fact. And yet, even within forgery, there can be truth. Fragments of older stories, misunderstood fossils, remembered floods, or the terror of something glimpsed once, never explained, but never forgotten. Was the sea monster a symbol of apocalypse, a memory of the sea reclaiming its own? Or was it something that truly swam beneath the surface, vast and unseen, stirring only when the world was ready to change? In the soft, salt-heavy winds that still blow across the Frisian coast, the sea is never far. Nor are its stories, and sometimes, even in silence, we wonder, what else waits beneath those ancient waters, still listening, still watching, still alive in the deep? Deep within the limestone hills of northern Spain, hidden beneath layers of earth and forest, lies a painted chamber frozen in time. The cave of Altamira, near the town of Santillana del Mar, is not large or grand at first glance. Its entrance is low, its halls winding and dim. But step inside, and the ceiling comes alive, covered in sweeping shapes, flowing pigments, and animal forms that flicker in torchlight as if they might move again. Discovered in the late 19th century, the Altamira cave paintings quickly shocked the academic world. Dated to as far back as 36,000 BC, these Paleolithic masterpieces defied everything once believed about early humans. The boldness of the figures, the use of natural contours in the rock to create depth and motion, and the complexity of the imagery showed a level of sophistication that still stirs wonder today. Herds of bison dominate the walls, bulky, strong, outlined in black and red ochre. Wild horses gallop beside them, and stags stretch their limbs across the stone. These animals are recognizable, echoing the fauna of Ice Age Europe. And yet, in the quieter corners of the cave, where fewer tourists tread and fewer lights shine, something stranger appears. Figures that don't quite fit. There are animals that resemble no species alive today, nor any confirmed from the fossil record. Creatures with elongated snouts or multiple horns branching in unusual patterns. Some appear to have scales or armor along their flanks. Others show limb proportions unlike any known mammal. Thick, upright legs ending in odd, clawed feet. A few figures are difficult to identify at all, like abstract shapes hinting at faces or bodies, yet slipping just out of recognition. What were these animals? Mainstream archaeologists generally interpret the more unusual figures as stylized renditions of known species. Bison drawn from memory, deer altered through symbolic perspective, or spiritual figures not meant to be literal. They point out that prehistoric art is not a photograph, but an expression, a ritual, a message. The oddities, they argue, are artistic license. But some researchers see a deeper mystery. The Paleolithic artists of Altamira were not isolated. Their work shares features with cave art across Europe, from Lascaux in France to El Castillo just a few kilometers away. And yet, certain forms at Altamira are unique. The hybrid animals, those that seem to blend features from multiple species or from creatures unknown, don't follow a pattern. They appear sporadically, tucked between the more naturalistic depictions. Were these simply mythical beasts, born of imagination? Or were they inspired by something real, now lost? It's not an impossible question. During the late Pleistocene, Europe was home to a remarkable diversity of megafauna, many of which are now extinct. Giant deer, cave lions, woolly rhinoceroses, mammoths, and steppe bison all roamed these lands. Some had no exact modern equivalent, and many fossil species were unknown to science until their bones were uncovered in the last 2 centuries. Is it possible that the artists at Altamira painted animals they saw, species not yet discovered in the fossil record? Some paleontologists have suggested that certain depictions at Altamira resemble the Megalocaris, or giant elk, but with exaggerated features not found in skeletal remains. Others argue that the so-called unknown animals might reflect regional or subspecies variations of now extinct creatures, those that lived in small, isolated populations and disappeared before they could fossilize widely. Another possibility is more unsettling, that the artists were remembering creatures that had already vanished. Passed down through generations, the image of a once-seen animal could persist in memory long after it disappeared from the land. Could these paintings be records of survivors, species clinging to the edges of extinction, glimpsed once in a lifetime and preserved only in pigment? And then there are the truly unclassifiable figures. One form on a side wall appears to have a reptilian body, a mammal's face, and what might be wings or a sail-like ridge along its back. Another looks vaguely aquatic, with sinuous limbs and a long, tapering tail. Are these depictions of dreams, of spirits, or were they inspired by fossil finds, exposed bones weathering out of ancient cliffs, interpreted as monsters of the deep? Some theorists have even suggested that Paleolithic people found and interpreted fossils, much like ancient Greeks did when encountering massive bones in the ground. Could the monsters of Altamira be reflections of fossilized memories, painted not from life, but from the earth? Even among mainstream scholars, the symbolic purpose of these paintings remains uncertain. Were they hunting magic? Did they serve as part of initiation rites, or shamanic journeys into altered states of consciousness? And if so, could the strange animals reflect visions rather than creatures of the flesh? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between. Altamira's unknown animals may be a blend of memory, myth, and experience. Records of a world in flux, where ice gave way to forest, where old species faded and new ones emerged, and where the boundary between real and imagined was far more fluid than we understand today. Whatever their origin, these figures remain quiet and watchful. Painted with care, tucked into darkness, untouched for tens of thousands of years, they stare out across time with the same questions we ask of them. What did the artists see? What did they remember? And in the flickering light of a torch, what truths walked those caves that no longer walk the earth? In the shifting sands of Egypt, where the Nile cuts through the desert like a ribbon of life, the temples rise from stone like echoes of a forgotten language. Beneath the sun-bleached columns and towering walls, among hieroglyphs that dance with symbolism, there emerges a figure both revered and feared. Part man, part beast, eyes like obsidian, teeth like blades. This is Sobek, the crocodile-headed god of ancient Egypt. Carved into the lintels of temples, painted in sacred scrolls, and invoked in spells and offerings, Sobek was more than a deity of water and fertility. He was a guardian of the Nile's wild nature, a protector of kings, a devourer of the wicked. With the muscular form of a man and the fearsome head of a crocodile, he embodied both creation and destruction, power and unpredictability. But what lies behind the image? The ancient Egyptians were masterful observers of the natural world. To them, animals were not simply creatures, they were manifestations of divine principles. And the Nile crocodile, in all its silent menace and sudden violence, commanded particular awe. Lurking in the muddy shallows, it could glide as still as a shadow, or strike with lethal force. It watched from beneath the surface, unblinking, as if waiting. To those who lived by the river, such a being could not be merely animal. It was something more. Sobek's cult flourished across Egypt, but especially in Fayum, an oasis region once known as Crocodilopolis. Here, sacred crocodiles were not just feared, they were worshipped. Embalmed, adorned with jewelry, kept in temple pools, and fed like royalty, they were seen as earthly vessels of the god himself. Some were mummified after death with great ceremony, interred in tombs with inscriptions calling upon Sobek's favor. Why such reverence for a predator? On one level, Sobek represented the raw force of nature, the power of the river to give life to the crops, to fill granaries, to sustain cities. But on another, his image hints at something older, deeper, and perhaps more mysterious. Some Egyptologists believe that Sobek predates even the structured pantheon of dynastic Egypt, that his origins lie in prehistory, in the vague, mythic layers of early human memory. Crocodiles were present in the Nile since at least the Holocene, and fossil evidence suggests that even larger species may have existed in the deeper past. Could Sobek's fearsome visage have been inspired not only by the Nile crocodile we know today, but by something bigger? A species long gone, remembered only in myth? There are occasional hints in temple inscriptions that Sobek's form was once more monstrous, less refined. Some depictions show a creature whose proportions do not match any known animal. A massive body, limbs too long or too short, scales too pronounced, jaws exaggerated. Could these be stylized depictions of symbolic power, or distorted folk memories of encounters with creatures that predated recorded history? The idea is not without precedent. Across Africa and the ancient Mediterranean, there are stories of enormous reptiles, beasts too large to be real, yet too persistent to be entirely dismissed. And in the dry caves and cliffs of Egypt's deserts, fossilized bones have been uncovered that suggest prehistoric crocodilians larger than any living today. Might the ancient Egyptians have discovered such remains, massive jaws, bones of impossible size, and woven them into their theology? Some fringe theories have speculated that the crocodile gods represent more than nature spirits, that they are echoes of an encounter, some deep memory encoded in stone, not necessarily with literal monsters, but with a worldview lost to us, a time when humans and animals lived in far closer proximity, when dangers came not only from the sky or the sea, but from the very river that fed them. Sobek's role in Egyptian cosmology adds further layers to the mystery. He is not merely a river god. He is also associated with resurrection, time, and the sun's journey through the underworld. In certain funerary texts, he helps guide the pharaoh's soul through the dangers of the Duat, the Egyptian afterlife. In others, he emerges from the primeval waters to push back chaos and ensure the world's rebirth each morning. These roles position Sobek not as a secondary figure, but as a foundational force, an ancient power wrapped in scaly skin, staring out from temple walls with a gaze that has not softened over millennia. Why a crocodile? Perhaps because even now they remain unchanged. Crocodiles are often called living fossils. Their bodies have altered little since the time of the dinosaurs. They are survivors, resilient, patient, lethal when they need to be. To the ancient Egyptians, who measured eternity in stone and shadow, what better symbol could exist for a force that transcends death? Still, questions linger. Why did Sobek's image persist for so long, even as other gods faded or changed? Why was he sometimes shown with multiple heads, or as a serpent-crocodile hybrid? Why was his presence tied so strongly to the mystery of resurrection, when he was also a symbol of destruction? Could Sobek be more than a god of the river? Could he be a reflection of something the Egyptians knew, or suspected, about the ancient world around them? About what might still dwell beneath the surface, watching from the murk? The temples of Sobek stand silent now. The sacred pools are dry. But in the museum halls and catacombs where his mummified animals rest, and on the walls where his image still snarls through the dust, the mystery endures. What truth or memory gave rise to the god with the crocodile's head? And what secrets of the deep, hidden in bone, in myth, or in time, still sleep beneath the waters of the Nile? Beneath the quiet forests of central Germany, in a former oil shale quarry near the village of Messel, time runs deeper than it seems. The air is still, the earth black and fine-grained, and just beneath the surface lies one of the most exquisite windows into the prehistoric world ever uncovered. This is the Messel Pit, a fossil bed so rich, so delicate, and so hauntingly preserved that it offers not just skeletons, but entire lives, paused mid-breath. Roughly 47 million years ago, long after the age of the dinosaurs had ended, but long before the rise of modern humans, this place was something very different. A lush, subtropical lake surrounded by dense jungle, teeming with life. Early horses no bigger than dogs, primitive bats, flightless birds, crocodiles, turtles, insects with their colors still intact. Even the leaves, still green in their fossilized form, float like shadows in the stone. And occasionally, the remains of creatures so strange emerge from the layers that they seem to belong more to dreams than to earth. The preservation here is uncanny. At Messel, the fossils retain not just bones, but skin outlines, feathers, stomach contents, even the remnants of last meals. This level of detail is almost impossible elsewhere, leading many to believe that the lake itself held special, perhaps even deadly properties. What made Messel so perfect and so deadly? Scientists believe the lake was a maar formed by a volcanic explosion. Over time, It filled with rainwater, and deep layers of sediment built up. The lake's oxygen-starved bottom waters became a trap. When animals fell in or sank to the bottom, there was little decay, no scavengers, only stillness and sediment, slowly sealing them into time. But some researchers have noted that many of the Messel fossils show no signs of violence or decay. Entire schools of fish appear frozen mid-swim. Turtles lie side by side, untouched. Mammals are curled in sleep-like poses, their eyes and delicate joints preserved. This has led to a darker theory, that the lake occasionally released toxic gases, perhaps carbon dioxide or hydrogen sulfide, in sudden bursts, killing any animals nearby, which then slid silently into the water. Was Messel a prehistoric paradise or a deadly trap? The fossils suggest both. Among the discoveries is the famous Darwinius Mokele, nicknamed Ida, a 47-million-year-old primate once hailed as a missing link in human evolution. Though that claim has since been tempered, Ida remains one of the most complete primate fossils ever found, preserved with fur, organs, and even the contents of her last meal. But beyond the celebrated specimens, there are other finds, less publicized, more perplexing. Some of the creatures discovered at Messel don't fit neatly into evolutionary trees. Fragmentary fossils of mammals with unusual limb structures, or reptiles with unexpected features, have stirred quiet debate. Are they unknown branches, failed experiments in evolution, or representatives of lineages we never knew existed? One such mystery involves a bird-like creature found with feather structures unlike any seen in modern avians, structures that seem adapted for something other than flight. Another fossil shows what appears to be a primitive bat with odd clawed limbs and a tail far longer than any of its modern relatives. Was it a glider, a climber, or something in between? Then there are the insects, astonishingly well preserved, their iridescent shells still shimmering under the light. Some species have no known relatives today. Others display traits typically seen only in distant ecosystems. What were they doing here, in the ancient forests of Europe? And what about the flora? Some fossilized seeds and leaves from Messel resemble modern plants, while others suggest strange hybrids, bearing features of multiple families. Were these simply ancient versions of familiar trees? Or representatives of lineages lost in time, wiped out in events we still do not fully understand? The deeper question echoes beneath it all. How much of the ancient world have we truly seen? Fossilization is rare, and exceptional fossilization, like that at Messel, is rarer still. For every Ida, every prehistoric horse, how many creatures vanished without a trace? How many plants, insects, or animals never left a mark, never touched the sediment in the right way, never surfaced into light? Messel may be one of the most complete windows into the Eocene epoch, but it also reminds us of what we still don't know. And then there are the whispers of even more controversial ideas. Some fringe theorists have suggested that certain Messel fossils don't just show extinct life, but anomalies, unexplained patterns, growths, or hybrid features that challenge accepted evolutionary timelines. These ideas remain speculative, often dismissed by mainstream science. Yet they persist in quiet corners of discussion. Could the unique preservation at Messel have captured not just natural diversity, but evolutionary transitions that happened too quickly, or too quietly, for standard models to track? Could Messel be a record not only of life, but of change? As paleontologists continue to uncover layer after layer, new species still emerge. Each excavation brings not just answers, but more questions. Shadows behind the fossils, stories not yet written, creatures still unnamed. In the silence of the quarry, surrounded by ancient forest and modern fences, the earth still breathes its secrets slowly. And as scientists kneel over stone slabs, Brushing away 47 million years of time with delicate tools, the mystery remains. What else lies hidden in the shale of Messel? And if a single ancient lake can preserve so much, what might still sleep, untouched, in the darkness beneath our feet?